Welcome to Backpacker Radio, presented by The Trek. I am your co-host, Zach Badger Davis. Sitting to my right today is...
Hi, I'm Julia John. I'm just kidding. I couldn't even say it. It's Elise.
It's Elise. Elise is
Sauce.
back. You guys know Sauce. I'm not even going to give you the intro because you've been on enough episodes at this point. Shame on anybody who's not familiar with you or your voice. Before we get to today's stellar interview, got a couple reminders for you. Backpacker Radio / The Trek is headed to Trail Days. This is going to be a couple weeks from now, so hopefully you're listening to this in time. But if you're going to be in Damascus for Trail Days, we'd love to see you. Please swing by, say hello. We're doing giveaways. We've got some sweet new hats that we're giving away, or I think selling, one of the two. Come with money. But yeah, we'd love to see you if you're going to be in town. And we're going to make this quick, but also we are on YouTube. What's up, YouTube? Can you guys wave at the camera? We are doing video podcasts. I know we say this at the end of every episode, but I'm saying it at the top now just to remind you guys to head on over to youtube.com/backpackerradio and hit that subscribe button. Give us the thumbs up. You're better at video than I am. What's like the spiel that people give to get people to...
Like, comment, subscribe.
Like, comment, subscribe. That's right. Thanks,
Don't
forget Elise.
to subscribe.
You've already earned your paycheck for today. That's it. I want to get right to today's interview. A repeat offender, and this is definitely a Backpacker Radio record for the longest gap between interviews that we've ever done in the history of the podcast, because your first interview was episode 25. We stopped serializing episodes even since then, but that was late 2018, so we're looking at math 5.5 years. Is that right? So it's been a minute. So very excited to pick up where we left off there. Obviously, that last interview ended with a cliffhanger. I'll give the intro here. Bethany Fidget Hughes has spent more than half her life abroad. Let me zoom in. Bad eyes. Growing up climbing in the Andes and jungles of Latin America, at first as the daughter of missionaries and later by choice. Bethany has hiked, paddled, and cycled over 22,000 miles across 25 countries as part of the Her Odyssey Expedition, a human-powered endeavor to connect the Americas following the longest chain of mountains in the world while telling the story of the land and its inhabitants, a journey she completed in August of 2022. We took that from your website. Thank you for that. Mm-hmm. Fidget, so good to have you back on the podcast.
Thanks. I've dangled on a couple cliffs since then, too.
I'm sure you have, and we're going to hear all about it. Could not be more excited. So before we get to the connecting part from where we left off last time, there was something that we were talking about before I hit the button here that I thought was really interesting. You recently wrapped a 10-day silent retreat. Can we start there?
Yeah, work our way backwards.
Yeah.
That's been an interest of mine to engage in an opportunity like that for probably about a decade. It's been one of those like on a list somewhere, getting moved around. And as I composed the post Her Odyssey period and trying to be intentional about that, it ended up in the top 5 things that I wanted to do in the 2 years as I decompressed. And my sister and her family are over in Thailand. And after I finished Her Odyssey, she and I were on the phone, and she was like, you know, you've been walking since before your nephews were born. Like, literally, I'd started Her Odyssey at the same time as my sister lost their first pregnancy. And so it has been a journey in our family, like with the rainbow babies and like bringing life back, to be able to circle back around to that and bring the stories from the trail home to the kids. And they're at those really fun ages, 7 and 4, where they're starting to have personality, and you can have these conversations and watch gravity work backwards, watch them fall up the stairs. So it felt really good to get to have 3 months time just reintegrating with family. I think that's a huge privilege that I don't take for granted after this long on the trail. And then within that, while I was in Thailand, I took the opportunity to take this train south to Koh Tao is the name of the district. And there's the Swan Monk Hermitage that specifically is interested in getting Westerners to understand more about Buddhist thinking and practices. So when I saw that opportunity to just go sit, I felt like I was at a stage where, you know, as at least through the first year after, I wasn't having the muscle twitches as much, or just like the burning, the pain that comes as your body changes shape after being on the trail that long. And I felt ready to sit down, and they put it really well on the first day there. Someone said it's like the opportunity, if your mind is a snow globe, a meditation retreat is an opportunity to let that settle enough to see like what's actually in there. And in that way, the values that I came to see as core to myself in thru-hiking, and then having brought that back through the process of reintegrating to society and where our planet and our culture are headed. And it was sort of an opportunity to bring those landscapes together in a safe space of my own mind and stillness. And of course, I walked there from the train station. It was like 6 miles, but that was enough to be like, okay, now I can sit still for 10 days.
Yeah, sure. Slow travel, as you say. I love the metaphor of letting the snow globe settle. I think that's a good way to put it. Not that I've ever done anything like that, but I can at least envision what you're doing there. Mm-hmm. You mentioned your body allowed you to sit still for that long. I'm curious, do they mandate that you're sitting in a particular position? Like, what does the day-to-day look like at a 10-day silent retreat?
So they were pretty flexible. This was intentionally set up as a welcoming environment for beginners. So I don't think we ever sat for more than an hour and a half at a stretch. But the way that the days looked is they would begin at 4 a.m., ringing a bell that was actually made from the head of a bomb that we dropped on Vietnam. So just a nice little Buddhist, let's just bring things back around and non-confrontationally address the issue. You'd wake up at 4 a.m. to that sound, and we would sit, and then we would do a yoga session, and then we'd have a breakfast at 7 or 7:30, and it was all grown right there on the grounds, just a lot of natural foods. Again, fortunately, I had some mentors who had warned me, like, be mindful of your substances in the months leading up to it and be prepared to go off of caffeine for 10 days straight. So I had been kicking the caffeine habit and those kind of things to make space for that. And then after breakfast, we would do chores. And then
How do they communicate the chores? I assume the instructors are also silent.
Mm-hmm. Generally, unless necessary to have a conversation. It's in the sign-up process. They have a whole list of different things, different chores, and they still retain a lot of Buddhist constructs. So there's a pretty strict division between male and female participants. So, for example, it was me and 3 other women, like sweeping one of the 4 different pagodas where we would sit and meditate. So we'd do that, and then we would
What are the male chores, out of curiosity?
They swept the male pagodas.
Oh, okay.
And, it made sense in its own way, and was also a challenge.
Yeah. I wasn't sure if they were going to be, like, out hunting the lions.
Yeah,
and you guys were making the sandwiches or something.
On a work day, on the final work day, when it was our chance to, like, give back to the grounds, they took all of the men over to another part of the monastery where women were not allowed to be, like a forest that, like, vaginas are a danger to. And then we got to rake the leaves around the grounds that we knew. So there was definitely a component of that I was aware of, and also confronting that in an international framework like that was an interesting way to reframe a lot of the experiences from Her Odyssey as well, and having adapted to, there's been so many times as women that we would come falling out of the woods somewhere in Latin America into, like a military encampment, and there's nothing around for 100 miles, and they'd be like, where did you just come? How did you get? They'd get all up in arms, and you could literally just play the, like, I got lost. And then they really want to help you. And fortunately, the way we'd be leaving is the way they would take us. But you just learned how to play those gender dynamics. And so then to experience it turned on its head by an entirely different faith structure, and to not know how to maneuver my way through that as adroitly as I do between the Western styles of it was really interesting. So, we do chores, and then I would practice reclining meditation, which often
fall asleep.
Was a nap, yeah. But we had a wooden pillow, so it wasn't like comfy nap grounds, but it was definitely there's another layer of meditation that can occur in the sleeping state.
Yeah. I think for me, waking up at 4 a.m. is scarier than 10 days of not talking. But I'm curious. I imagine a lot of people are resistant to something like this, myself included, because just the fear of losing your mind. Like, it's built into our DNA to communicate and be collaborative in a community. Is there any sort of friction like that, like where you start to feel like you're losing yourself?
There is a component of losing the grip that you have on it, and in that you have to be able to trust your environment to hold space for that fall, and also like make an effort to help you reseat afterwards. Yeah, I can see why that would be a fearful thing. And also, it's again like backpacking. Each time you go further out, you know you can come back from that far out. And if you can go 10 days into yourself, it also was kind of like a thru hike, because it was, you were counting up the days at first. Like the third day is usually when, if you're not going to be able to stick it out, when people tend to meander off.
Do a lot of people leave?
I think about a quarter of our participants did, but I was really impressed with the number of folks who like stuck it out, and was surprised by some of the ones who just, because it's silent, so people just kind of disappear. Like you talk in the first day, like arrange your chores, like kind of learn the routine, and then there's a little cork board with messages, but beyond that, there's not a lot of communication, so people just kind of like go. And but yeah, 10 days to go inward was a really excellent opportunity to sort of lay the horizon lines together and see what the landscape looks like, and to step back from having been living at a slow travel pace on Her Odyssey, and then jumping back into civilization and feeling like it was like warp speed all of a sudden, and need to produce so much and do so much output, and then to go into a Buddhist country where people are just more accepting, and so the planning isn't as prevalent. That component of it also felt like Latin America. Like, I mean, you can plan all you want, but the weather's going to be what it's going to be, and who's going to show up will show up. So I appreciated sort of that loosening of it, and then within that to go into a safe space to just let it all go. And I knew that there would be no technology, that there would be no speaking. We did do walking meditations, which was, all about 15 feet pacing back and forth for like half an hour at a very slow pace. But beyond that, it was just a lot of stillness and going inward. And once I knew I could go in there and come back from it, I know that I can get myself into and out of most any kind of situation.
Yeah, that's an interesting learning, that going within yourself makes you feel more prepared to handle. But I can totally see how it would lead to that. Did you find yourself like having moments where you wanted to speak or where you did speak? I feel like I wouldn't be able to stop myself. Because that's such habit, is to just like say hello to someone or ask a question. Did you ever have to stop yourself, or did you ever accidentally speak?
Yeah. Let's see. Once towards the end, out of irritability,
yeah,
is with. I think one of the weird things that I learned after so long of being a backpacker and being like, oh, I'm against, like, I don't stand for rules. Like, I live this, like, alternative structure. And it was really interesting to get still and to be like, holy cow, I live the way that I do because I love structure. And I love rules that, a lot of the human rules are open to interpretation or are overstepped or some. And growing up, I always had a really hard time with the inequitable application of the outcome of laws and rules, and often felt betrayed by them in my own life journey. And so once I came up against nature, it's like, okay, her rules are absolute, and there is no reason to like apologize or expect an apology. And so you move through that structure. And then in meditation, I kind of like came back to that and was like, oh, I actually really like structure and rules. It just looks different, just because I don't know where I'm going to lay my head the next night. But then also, what is the cost of that? Because after 7 years of it as well, I mean, when you thru hike, you're able to plan those things out. When you're looking at multiple years, or particularly in countries with volatile, with changing political environments, you can spend as much energy as you want making plans. But after a while, you learn there's only so far that you're going to get returns on that. And beyond that, you're just assuaging your own anxiety. So why not just stop there and go read a book?
Speaking of reading a book, you've already dropped a few thesaurus dictionary grammars there. You just used the swage. There was another word earlier. I'm like, damn,
That's a good word.
That's a good diction right there.
Well, I've been working on a memoir for the past couple of years. I'm pretty deep in the writing groups and going into those spaces.
Yeah, nice. I know you've always been a great writer. Okay, well, let's start at the top of where I think people are interested to hear, obviously, is where we left off with the last interview. Since this was so many years ago, can we just do a quick getting caught up to speed of where I guess the origin of this journey and where we had left off previously?
Am I supposed to do that?
Yeah, because I think if I try to do it, I'll do a poor job with it, and I'd like to hear it in your words. But I mean, yeah, introduce Her Odyssey, the journey, the full scope of it, and I guess just like you don't have to give any highlights from the first leg of it, but basically where you had left off.
Okay. So what did you say? We talked in, was it 2019?
It was the end of 18.
Winter of 2018, and we had just finished, the Her Odyssey team had just finished the first portion of the expedition, which was traveling the length of South America, primarily by thru-hiking, and then we also collaborated with the Waterkeeper Alliance in Peru to paddle a river to help bring awareness before it got dammed. The mission of Her Odyssey was to travel the length of the Americas and connect the story of the land and its inhabitants. And it was myself and primarily another woman named Lauren Neon Reed, also a Triple Crowner. And we spent, I think it was almost 3 years, walking from south of Patagonia, from Tierra del Fuego up to Turbo, Colombia. And then once we were getting into an area with a lot more border crossings to have happen, also was around COVID time and was traveling in pretty remote communities with a high population of elders, and Latin hospitality is a very powerful thing, and it's a very important thing to them. And I didn't quite understand what was happening with COVID, but as I was starting to all I knew is that there was a bunch of toilet paper everywhere that they were selling, and everybody in the U.S. was like buying toilet paper. And having been in Latin America for a while, I was like, all right, yeah, just like everybody in North America, it's their turn with diarrhea. And it turns out that was not the situation at all. But I was sitting in a church in Zacatecas, Mexico, trying to figure out like what is the right thing to do, and this little grandmother came up and gave the traditional greeting, like holding hands and the kisses on the cheek, and I'm so like pleased that you're here. And I just realized that what I was attempting to accomplish was incongruent with honoring their systems of like being polite and welcoming. I would necessarily be putting them at risk, because things we take for granted, like, oh, all you have to do is wash your hands thoroughly. Well, then there you're assuming you have soap, that you have running water, that you have access to a lot of these things. So I had this aha moment, and then realized that I needed to pull off of Her Odyssey and sit back and wait until the world was a little bit more prepared for this. So ended up taking 2 years off and kind of like pacing around like a caged lion, waiting for the opportunity to keep going. But the way we ended up putting it together is, after thru-hiking South America, we ended up bike packing Central America. We backpacked South America and then sea kayaked from Colombia to Nicaragua, and then bike packed from Nicaragua to Mexico to the border with the U.S., and then across the U.S. I got to thru-hike the Continental Divide Trail, and then hike the Great Divide Trail into Canada, and then put a canoe into the water and paddled out the Arctic drainage, and finished in Tuktoyaktuk in, I think it was August 2022.
Cool.
Wow.
I'd love to drill down into the Central America component of this. I mean, we'll do everything, but basically where we had left off last time. So give me the timeline, because you mentioned that you had to put a pause on this because of COVID, which makes perfect sense. You had started prior to the pandemic, correct? Mm-hmm. Or at least the Central America leg portion of this.
Yeah, we were still going on that. The interesting thing about Central America was that it was the most significant break from this being a thru-hiking expedition to being multi-sport. Mm-hmm. And I wasn't I don't know, bike packing. Like I wasn't certain about it, and I was pretty attached to the grunge factor of thru hiking, that you can like really do it for really cheap. And the bike packing is really interesting because you definitely get what you pay for in terms of goods.
Yeah. And biking is not cheap.
No, holy cow,
Yeah.
it's really not. And you know, with my missionary upbringing and still having sort of that attitude of coming at it from a servant's angle and from not having more than what you need. I had a friend who like built a bike out for me just kind of from hodgepodge parts. I called it La Cucaracha, and the thing was just like falling apart between my legs the entire time, but it was also kept me going. And so that was a meditation I spent a lot of time in when I was, for example, up along the U.S.-Mexico border. We hopped over to the Baja Divide because the district that we had been going to go through was having some balance of power struggles. But that entire ride on the Baja Divide had been this meditation of, I had this concept of myself as deficient because I didn't have all of the sweet gear. Like I didn't have the 3-inch wide tires. I had sort of more adaptable tires than like the people who were just kitted out for this trip. And then while changing, I think it was my 13th flat, and sitting there just looking out at a whole bunch of cactus and think, oh, it's desert. But then in my mind, I could see them. I heard the bird song, and I could see them as trees, and I could see 7 different species of cactus all in one place. And I realized that all I had to do was shift my mindset. This isn't a difference between deficiency and sufficiency. I am coming from a place of sufficiency, and it's because abundance is set as the normal standard of what to have. And when you're a backpacker or a bike packer, you're always kind of towing that line, right? Because you don't want to be carrying an abundance of gear that you're not going to need, but you definitely need a sufficiency of food if you're going to run out. So that kind of helped me understand how flexibility in your own mindset and in how you're willing to approach a landscape will define the experience as much as any internal narrative, because the internal narrative, you can switch that yourself. It's nuts.
Yeah. That's powerful.
I know in yours and Neon's interview that you gave on the trek, which was excellent, by the way, she mentioned that her affinity for bike packing is ticking up, like it's becoming her favorite mode of travel. How would you describe your love of bike packing?
I think I was willing to do bike packing because of the multiple facets of Her Odyssey. There wasn't just the ground in front of us. It was about the people who were connected to that ground. And then within that, it was also like the community. And one time I sat out and I like drew it out, and it all looked like a little egg with like myself and bringing Lauren along as a partner, and then the other folks who hiked, or when she would like go and do something different. I paddled, for example, the Cunayala with another woman, Eileen, who has like deep roots in that community. And so building out that network was really important. And so acquiescing to the bike packing was definitely more of a component of the partnership aspect of Her Odyssey than it was of interest to me. But then you get on the bike, man, and you start flying down a hill, and you're like, I remember this feeling when I was 7 years old, and it has the added adult component of like, and I have everything that I need. So like, I truly am. I'm not going to get called back in for dinner at 5:30, man. Like I get to decide when I eat dinner, and then I could ride some more, or I can like take a nap. So it was really fun, but the financial barriers is definitely still disenchanting for me at this component of the game. It's also highly, highly competitive because it's such an easy to photograph sport. Anytime I've tried to take a picture of myself bike packing, it ends in a wreck. So, and that's one of the other components of being a modern female athlete. Like they've done some studies. Most of the pictures of female athletes are selfies.
Wow.
Like I think they did like a study. It was like the X Games photos between like the male and the female competitors, and the vast majority of the ones of females are, taken by themselves, and the other ones are taken more professionally, or like when they're joined groups. But we would definitely be like trying to like take pictures on the bike, and lost a phone or two to that, sacrificed a phone or two to that effort.
Yeah.
That sort of brings up the question for me. I know there's elitism in a lot of outdoor sports, and I feel like you're kind of touching on that as far as bike packing. Do you find that it's more prevalent in bike packing than it is in long distance hiking, or? Yeah. Interesting.
Yes, I strongly do, and I very much struggled with it because of the different, I think fundamentally there's a difference in how routes are created. In bike packing, it just seems to be if someone can do it and they upload that route to the internet, then anyone who can find a line on the internet feels that that route should be available to them. And there's a privilege that goes along with being on the front end, especially when it comes to international travel, in terms of behaviors that are just out of line to the culture are not going to be addressed with you directly because you're one of the first 1, 3, or 5 people doing it. And those first 1, 3, or 5 people doing it are generally people who are well kitted out and experienced athletes and able to push through situations that then 2, 3, 4 years later, someone like myself is coming along on a bike like La Cucaracha, and the route that they made is through this small town with huge gang problems. And they now know that there's this stream of like kind of confused white people like tootling through some of these alleys, and it's a downright risk for people further along once the communities have adapted. I also think we bring a northern perspective of, it's really been blowing my mind, these concepts of like people pointing out that the concept of wilderness is a white concept and that nature is something apart from everyday life. And a lot of so then that comes to the point of people talking about, oh, well, I would stealth camp. And like, there's no such thing as stealth camping on ancestral lands. It's just if you're conducting yourself in such an odd or peculiar way that they don't feel like they can approach you. Like it's the guest's responsibility to approach the host and ask them. So if you don't approach and ask them, then their thought is like, oh, there's probably something kind of weird about this person, and they leave you alone. But then you go and you write these blogs about like, oh, it was so solitary and I was able to stealth camp the whole time. And then eventually people are like, okay, these people just keep showing up. And so then we'd be riding along these bike routes and there's these bright new red fences saying like no entrance or call this number in order to like get permission. And I would send that feedback back to the people who'd like left the tracks of the trail and be like, here's what's, and they're like, well, that wasn't there when I came through. And it's like, well, yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
So I think there's a component of diligence that needs to be done. And that's kind of a difference that I've seen between the thru-hiking realm and the bikepacking realm is bikepacking. If somebody can do it, then, oh, well, anybody can do it. And with our long-distance trail network in North America, there's a lot of diligence and a lot of work put into honoring the people who keep the lands that we get to enjoy. And I think that's really important that translate over. And I'm hoping it's just because bikepacking is that much younger than backpacking that maybe given a couple more decades, we'll get better about that.
Yeah. So you mentioned the people that had done the bikepacking routes prior to you had maybe not done it in the most culturally sensitive way. For somebody listening to this that did want to follow your track or a similar track, what pieces of advice would you offer them?
I would say do the work of making your own track. I've really been amazed since I've started backpacking, seeing how much technology has advanced to like the Snap 2, like one of our partners like Gaia, and they have like those Snap 2 features. And I think that the increased access of information is making people then assume that that on the ground it will be the same way. And we have a very like coddled and cultivated opportunity to gather information, but then when you get out there on the ground, it looks a whole lot different than what might have been on paper. Or even, it comes down to things like as much as like going into Mexico and then being like, oh, well, you can't bring weapons, and being like, oh no, we can't bring pocket knives. Well, but like rules like that are more like ideas, So I would say create your own route. Like feel free to use those resources, but you need to ground it in something and putting time and effort and diligence into building that rather than being like, oh, there's a route, so now I'm going to go hike it. I spent years going through satellite imagery, like painstakingly, and like looking at fences. And I think a lot of that ended up being totally not applicable to anything other than putting my mind into a state of focus that then once I was out there, I wasn't expecting the information to come to me. I was watching for the information around me. And I think one of the other differences, or one of the things that I would really recommend, and that it seems pretty hard for first world people, is you have to let go of the self-sufficiency component. Like, you're not doing this by yourself, right? Any person who's through hiked has had help, whether it's a kind word or some sort of act. So this, or like shame, that was one of the grounds that I heard a lot from people. Was like, well, I don't speak very good Spanish. And that language barrier is very real, and also humbling and sometimes humiliating yourself enough to try speaking in Spanish does a lot for building those relationships. So it's like, just as much as you want to go learn about the land, you also have to put yourself out there to learn about the relationships, and honoring how the relationships are done in the area that you're going to is just as important as the groundwork that you do preparing the trip for yourself. And I think that comes to like the heart of what I've come away from Her Odyssey with in terms of slow travel, is being willing to like decentralize your own narrative and to take the opportunity that you have to be immersively in a space, as backpacking and bikepacking are like unique to do. Like, let that egg crack open and just see how it's done around you, and participate in that, even and maybe especially when it goes counter to what is your comfort. Because anytime I've come up against those places that rub or that feel raw, like, those are always the richest places for growth and developed understanding. And some of them I've only been able to put together after Her Odyssey, because in that moment, right, you're just trying to survive the moment. But giving yourself time afterwards to intentionally look back on the experience, and see it from when you're actually physically in a safe space, mm-hmm. as opposed to just trying to muster through, is pretty critical. So I think that would be my advice. Put the effort into planning, and then once you're there, really just be there. And even if you have the route on your phone, like, ask a local for help. Like, that in a big way honors their knowledge, mm-hmm. and makes them a part of the trail. And that was how I ended up like along the Baja Divide, sitting down with like people who lived along the trail, and we're like, we've been wondering who you people are.
Yeah. That's wild.
So yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I remember you had mentioned during the first interview that you were, this might be my memory twisting it, but you were surprised at how few scenarios felt unsafe in the South American journey. I'm curious if that changed through the Central American portion of the journey.
They're very, very different spaces. And I would also say that my perspective with time of South America has also shifted. I think that when you're in a situation, you feed yourself the narrative that you need to get yourself safely through. And that might be necessarily not considering a lot of external information. That
self-deception.
Yeah, exactly. And then in order to like build the story out, to like share it and to express it, has been having to like, sitting in an apartment in the United States, feeling safe and being able to like read the journals and just being like, oh, little girl, oh my God. Like, you were followed by a group of drunk men for like a night by yourself, and you're like, don't worry, I'll just camp in the church lot. Nobody rapes a woman in church. Like,
yeah. Okay. So, were you then maybe just more keenly aware of what was happening in Central America as it was happening, or did you think that it was worse or better? I guess
I think it was just more concentrated because there's more people concentrated in a smaller area. Okay. And the grounds are all very much in use, and there's also a wide variety of identities within each of the nations. And I think borders are always the most dangerous part of any kind of international, like, borders were always the most stressful. And interestingly, like, the U.S.-Mexico border was of them probably like in the top 3 sketchiest border crossings, which was a really interesting experience. But I would say South America and Central America are extremely different culturally, and the machismo presents in a much more concentrated manner in that narrow strip between the Americas. So there was another woman who like bikepacked Central America, and she wrote these really honest blogs. I think it was like a girl and her bike. But she and I would have to like back her up on it. There's some of the countries in Central America that I would not recommend that women go bikepack.
Where in particular?
I would probably not Nicaragua. I don't want to like hate on it, right? Because I was also aided greatly by amazing people in those countries. But if you're just looking for someplace fun to like go ride and have an experience, like right now, Guatemala's not the place. Like if we go back to South America, Peru are having a really hard time right now. There's a lot of sketchy stuff going on. So it's really difficult when we talk about, you know, pleasure travel in Central and South or throughout Latin America, because it changes so much with the shifting political landscapes. Yeah. And right now there are significant shifts happening that, I mean, it's interesting. I've been following the news and basically all I can get is like Al Jazeera on some of these countries because there's just not the news about it. And it hit me between the eyes sitting with some miners in Peru. And they're like, well, yeah, we had like this huge protest. Like it made world news. Didn't you see it? And I had this moment of sitting back and being like, man, I studied international law and policy in college. And I've literally never heard about this conflict that for them was like huge. Yeah. And so there's this one way flow of information that the U.S. is putting out a lot, but we're not like getting very much back in, which is something that you almost have to correct for if you're planning your own international hike, and you have to know how to read between the lines. Like I was combining looking at the State Department like travel advisories with talking to you always need to have someone on the ground, and if you can find someone who doesn't have like a financial interest, it really opens up like communication. And also you tend to just find really good like people who do something out of heart are a certain kind of people, and those are the kind of people that made Her Odyssey possible, because we never had more than what we always had sufficiency, but abundance was not, like financial abundance was never something that was even in my reckoning in terms of like how to approach this. So yeah, sorry, tangent, but
did you find the State Department's travel advisories to be pretty accurate?
They're really good at giving you a big picture, and I found them extremely helpful to be subscribed to them for 2 or 3 years beforehand and just sort of observe the trends and being like, oh, like for example in Peru we started to joke, you know, it's like, okay, it's protest Tuesday. And then there's also like protest season because like the weather's good. So people don't mind, you know, being out. And so you can kind of like watch those patterns. It's just like calling a weather forecast on your InReach, right? Like you can call it once and try to hang your hat on that. But what's more helpful, we found, is like we would call a weather forecast each night and just sort of watch the trends and be like, okay, that storm is obviously moving faster. And it's the same, I think, with natural phenomena as it is with social phenomena. You can watch those movements, and I think that's one of the differences as a woman hiking internationally is your alert and alarm system is at play long before any sort of dangerous scenario like has arisen. If you end up in a dangerous scenario, you've made a series of decisions that got you there. And we tried to be really intentional in how to check that because it was just made it more fun and more safe. And even so, there was a lot of risk.
Would you say that the advice for which countries, or just keeping an eye on those things, would that apply to pretty much anyone who wants to bikepack, I would assume? Or are there extra considerations for solo women who want to travel to those areas?
I think for everyone, a way to both improve and just enrich the enjoyment of your experience is to have a connection with someone on the ground before you get there.
How do you go about that?
I mean, in this day and age, I see it happening a lot in Facebook groups. If you start, the Latin community are extremely like responsive folks, and if you can find your way into one of like the Facebook groups of like a local community, or I even found like it worked like up north going into Indigenous territory in Canada, like they had their Facebook pages for their communities, and that's just where everything gets sorted out. So it'd either be that, it would be, you know, getting in touch with, there's a lot of like guiding companies, like in Guatemala, for example, there's an amazing bike packing base there that can really give you a great like introduction to the country, and then you could like go off and do something on your own, but with that deeper understanding of having been with a guide. It was something that went really counter to my, you know, I do it all myself, was to like hike with a guide. But I'm glad that I did that. Before I started Her Odyssey, I went on a guided hike in Nepal, and I was able to see to be given a streamline into like cultural integration that I would have completely missed if I had just been going as low budget as possible and do it myself. And so I think, again, like humbling myself to that point to like go on a guided hike was really hard at first. And then I realized like, holy cow, this enriches things. So I would say, you know, even if it's just signing up for, if you plan to be in a country for a month, if you can sign up for a guided tour that goes around for the first 5 days, or if you're interested specifically in bike packing, like there's those options, or backpacking, there's a ton of those, and you get that sort of crash course, and then you kind of build your own out of that.
Yeah. I had a similar experience, I feel like, studying abroad, even in college, having, I think, you know, afterwards I was like, oh, should I have just traveled solo and saved a bunch of money rather than paying essentially like tuition to take classes while I was there? But having those ins with people in the local community who they set you up with through the program was huge. Like there's people I still stay in touch with from that, which like local Greek people and stuff. So yeah, it's awesome.
Especially language learning classes. Like those are a great way, because a lot of them do the homestay component, and that's when like those networks will open up to you. And that was like when I got up to Tuktoyaktuk, the folks were telling me about like this young Japanese man who had a plan. He wanted to like walk across the Arctic, and he ended up just like camping there and like training for a winter. And so he didn't end up doing the trek that he had planned, but he just like became a part of the community. And the woman, Granny, who we stayed, helped connect us to the community. She was like, yeah, it was his job to build the fire each morning. And so that communities that hold that door open to let you be a part of it is one of the things that I think we're really starving for in this country, and that we're trying to like fabricate in within a capitalist structure. And those needs are met by social structures. So there's not the structure that we may like hope in the guarantee of those things, because a lot of it takes like leaping on faith. But if you get connected with the families and can see how it works first, man, it really it doesn't open doors, even though it does, but what it really opens is your eyes. So you stop banging your head against the doors.
Yeah. I think I took us off course with Elise's question, which was a really good one about different considerations for female travelers, especially solo or in small groups. You mentioned that it's good to have boots on the ground there. I think that's where I derailed us. I'd be curious to get your take on Elise's question.
Yeah. Having contact on the ground, I think you just have to be really realistic with what you're going to confront. And I really struggled for a long time with this should thinking of like, I shouldn't have to be dealing with this. And that was kind of where I realized that anywhere I hear the word should, you're speaking from a place of privilege. And when I was paddling the Rio San Juan between Nicaragua and Costa Rica, I was talking to a woman, and she was telling me about how her son was eaten by a crocodile in front of her. And my experience was to be traumatized by hearing the telling of this story, but then watching her, there wasn't the same kind of reaction to it. And I kind of asked about that, and she's like, it's just the reality of things, you know, like people who truly live close to subsistence, there just is and is not. There's not should and shouldn't be. And so if we're at a place that we can think like that, then another component of it was having gone through periods of like food deficiency and realizing how much that can really rob you of your capacity for higher reasoning. So I think particularly as a woman, but also for anyone, you need to set it up so that you don't have to perform at your best while you're out there. You need to give yourself some like grace and wiggle room, because there are going to be challenges that there's no way that you can account for that are going to come up along the way. And so giving yourself that space for grace is a critical component for safety, because any situation that you end up in where there's only one way through it, whether that's in your own mind talking, or if it's literally like you're physically like, once I climb up this thing, there is no getting back down, you're inherently entering a dangerous situation. And so that was one of the things that we did with Central America in particular, was for the bike packing routes, having 2 or 3 different routes along the separate coasts. and one up the middle. And at each one of those junctures, deciding which way to go based on what we had heard in the area, because a lot of the, like I said, a lot of the things in South America, word of it doesn't get out past like the local communities. Yeah. So I think that would be the final piece that I would add, particularly for like women, but also I think anyone, just in terms of safety. You might need to be ready to just scratch your entire plan and go the opposite direction or a different way. If you're traveling in Latin America or like Asia in particular, you're not traveling the land of North America and like permits ahead of time and everything's scheduled and mail drops. You're going to be winging it, and you have to be prepared to give yourself the grace necessary to do that.
Yeah. So having laid the foundation that if somebody wanted to do a journey like this, that they should be ready to pick their own adventure and probably to not follow the footsteps or bike track or kayaking route that somebody else has gone before you. That being said and understood, I'd love to talk more about the specifics of your route, and I'd love to hear some like the highlights around the way, specifically through the Central America portion.
Okay. I really enjoyed kayaking, and sea kayaking was a really interesting experience, to be surrounded by so much water and be running low on drinking water. The Cunayala Islands, I would say, was the San Blas Islands, I think is what they're more widely known as. It's an archipelago of about 360 islands, and it's the Kuna people who had lived in the interior of the Darien Gap. And if you talk to them, you know, there's a lot of like narcos and coyotes, and there's a lot going on. There's a lot of commerce moving through that area. But when you talk to them about, well, why did you guys come down out of the jungle? They're like, there was a lot of mosquitoes. We just really didn't like the mosquitoes. There's no mosquitoes out here. And like, legit, there's no mosquitoes. And you're in this tropical paradise, and they're super welcoming.
I'm just looking at the photos on Google Images, and this looks like what I imagine the islands of Thailand to look like.
Yeah. But like, all like, you know, the Thailand has done a good job of like highlighting where they have white beaches, and the San Blas Islands is just kind of all white. Like we would paddle in, there'd be like an old man out there with a machete, and you know, you'd give him a couple pesos and he'd like he would have done it without the pesos, but would like chop open like fresh coconuts for you, because you're like, oh, I'm so dehydrated. And then I came back to the States and was like, oh no, like the coconut is like $6, and I have a bad habit.
It comes in a can.
The coconut water is cheap.
But I would say paddling the Cunayala was nice because the community have a structure around it, so you can sort of like get your permits, but within that it's flexible, and it's a really great way to support an indigenous community who are like holding their identity autonomous despite a lot of pressures that we don't understand.
Did you see a lot of crocodiles doing that?
We saw more crocodiles paddling inland from Lake Nicaragua out to the coast. It happened to be their hatching season, which apparently they're less ornery than they are during the breeding season.
That makes sense.
But yeah, I've looked into the eyes of some beings that see past time, and it's really disconcerting.
Sure. They're dinosaurs.
Yeah.
Is there like a protocol for what you're supposed to do when there's a crocodile?
Okay, so that was one of the things that we would do as a team. Is once a quarter I would come up with a scenario, and after about a year or so, we would like find actual on the ground scenarios, and we would spend half a day or a day like talking through if that situation arose. So it's like if a leg was broken in Patagonia and nobody can get to us for like 3 or 4 days, or if we get kidnapped in Colombia, and then in Central America we debriefed on if one of us got flipped by a crocodile. And after about like 2 hours talking with our travel or our safety advisor, and having read a couple incidences and debriefing on those specific incidences, it was just like, well, it'll be over fast.
Oh, wow.
Like,
there's like not much you can do, really.
Not if they decide that in murky waters. I think it was more about like setting your mindset, but there was definitely like the steps beforehand. Sure. How could we we need to be paddling close together. How would we respond to this situation? What I found really interesting was learning how to identify them. Like you don't see it's just like when you're fishing, right? You're not looking in the water for a fish. You're looking for that shimmer, for that particular kind of movement. With the crocodiles, is just you'd be like looking for, they would just look like lily pads, but they would have like 2 bumps, and then the lily pads would just sink.
Oh.
And like the hard thing for me with the crocodiles is like their safe spaces in the water, and I feel better about them being on the land over there. And so we would have like a conflict of interest sometimes, where the crocodile would see us and like run into the water that we're trying to paddle past on. And that was a really interesting moment to sit there and look at my own, you know, I had all of these like first world nations like, oh, animal poaching is terrible. And also in that moment, I was like, I'm really glad that these crocodiles have living memory of humans hunting them because, you know, with beings like that, they just.
Yeah. They're scary. They're big. They got a lot of teeth.
Yeah, and they get bigger closer to the coast.
Yeah. Oh, interesting. Is there like a certain time of day? Sorry to interrupt, but I know like, you know, like bears are more active at dusk, right? And dawn. Is that something that you can factor in with crocodiles?
Fortunately, I don't have a ton of experience to speak to that. What I did observe in the jungle is that it's pretty much all critters. We all run the same routine. Like morning time, I talked to this guy who lived in the jungle and he's like, I hate it, but I loved it. Right at dawn and at dusk, every single living being would just like start announcing like, hey, I'm still alive. Like, I'm over here. Like it would be a din. I mean, a deafening din of all of the animals like getting after it. And so I'm pretty sure that they were also more like morning and evening, but everything from grizzly bears to us.
I'd just love to keep going on this thread. So you talked about kayaking through, this was Guatemala, did you say?
That was Panama.
Okay.
And then up to Lake Nicaragua. I actually really enjoyed Nicaragua. That's one of the countries that has like a more negative rap, but I've had a really positive experience of that country. There's around Lake Nicaragua, there's like the way that everybody goes, and then there's sort of like the backroads way that's going past a bunch of like farms. And I had this it was a really hot, sweaty day, and I'm riding along, and there's all these little motos, right? And there's somewhere, it was always a joke, we would try to like guess how many people were going to be on the moto, and you know, a sack of potatoes counts as a child type like math. But we heard this moto coming and heard it kind of gunning down. And then they passed me like too close for my comfort, and I was irritated. But then I looked up and like stepped out of my like overheating brain space, and the passenger, they drink water out of bags. They're just these little plastic bags, and he was like holding out this like perspiring bag of like cold water, and just did this like drive-by handoff. Which was so cool. And so there's just that kind of generosity. And then, you know, sitting down and talking to a family, the young woman like made flowers, and talking to the dad who'd served in the military and like had his leg blown up in this war that I hadn't even known had gone on. And they're like, yeah, you know, everybody who's immigrating is coming past here. So and they're talking about like the racism and the challenges that immigrants face in like crossing Central America just to get to the US, where everybody knows they're ripe for the picking. And you just kind of start to see humans as the herd animals that we are. And the people in Nicaragua are very aware of what's happening, and very much just like, and life will be life. And you get through what you can, and where we can, we will help you. So I would say Nicaragua was one of my like really bonus finds. Costa Rica is always very welcoming. Yeah. And then Mexico is just so wildly diverse. You could go, oh man. Yeah, like Mexico has countryside that rivals the Rockies, and firs and pines, like so much more like diversity in the plant life and similar kinds of landscape that you don't expect because you only see the tourist destinations, like the beach components. But if you're willing to go inland towards like the Sierra Madres, oh man, and the food, Mexico, man, that's where it's at.
Yeah. Did you have any unsafe moments in Mexico?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Did you find it to be any better or worse than the other Central American countries from that perspective specifically?
I think any country where large portions of the population are forced to move for work and due to environmental degradation are generally less safe and stable people, or that not that they're more desperate for survival, and so they approach life differently. And as a white woman leisure traveling through spaces where people are there because they're trying to survive, it would behoove you to be aware that your context is very different from theirs. Mm-hmm. And I think that, to me, it feels like a respect thing, but then played out a couple steps down the line, you realize it's actually a safety thing.
Mm. Mm-hmm. And specifically by that, do you mean just keeping space in more risky areas, or how does that present?
It's accepting that the image that you put out there says a whole lot. So, for example, while in the U.S., I wouldn't say no, to sitting down and like having a beer after a long hike. In Latin America, and particularly in Mexico, we just said we were nuns, man. At some points, like, we want to stop and we want to be able to get food at these places, and the people there want to be like friendly to you. I forget exactly which country I was in, but we were right at a border, and there's always like really good restaurants around there for some reason, but definitely a whole bunch of like gangsters were coming for their Sunday drink and wanted to like buy us drinks, and they wanted to take pictures, I thought with us, but it was like with this doll head that I traveled with. They're like, make sure that your bike with the doll face is like in the foreground. And then they kind of like stood in front of me and Laura, and I was just like, okay, so you want, okay. But they want to be polite, so they offer to buy you a drink, and you need to have a safe way to say no to that, because even opening that door is opening a path that those of us with the privilege of like should and shouldn't and how I should be treated, it's hard for us to see that. But when you're that isolated, you can't play the odds like that. I would say I would circle that back around to strong advice to any woman or any sort of minority traveling alone, and particularly queer people as well, is you really have to, you don't owe anybody the benefit of the doubt
or an explanation.
And you don't owe them an explanation. You can always fall back on like, just don't understand. Like, even if I'd been speaking fluently to someone, if things got bad, all of a sudden I just didn't speak Spanish, and they were like, oh well, and they would accept that. But you don't owe anybody a second chance. You don't owe someone the benefit of the doubt. If your gut, if your spidey sense, if any part of you says no, then you learn how to trust that. And that was one of the things I really appreciated about traveling with another woman. If I was like, we're not walking down that alley, even though it looks like 10 other alleys, but like, and Lauren never questioned me on those things. There wasn't no like, justify yourself. Like, that's what makes sense. Like, so I think that's really important, to trust your intuition and don't give that away, and be mindful. Like, the image that you present does define a lot of what comes your way.
So more often than not, were you abstaining from going in town and eating at restaurants and having a beer, or was it only in areas where you said your spidey senses were going off?
Every 2 or 3 months, we would like camp up in like a city, someplace that we could be kind of anonymous. When we were moving through areas, though, no, we had, it's so weird and puritanical, but it's like, we didn't go out after dark. We didn't go places alone. We weren't seen drinking. I just, one of the things that I learned through Central America that was probably one of my biggest safety, like going through some areas that was specifically like, do not go here. And you would see like the people who run the area like sitting at the bars lining the streets, but we would move at the same time as the women and children did. Like, the times that all of the kids are walking to school, like, nobody's going to start a shootout because all of your kids are out there. Sundays when grandmas are going to the market in the morning, like, those are good times to be moving. Sundays after 2 p.m., you do not be, if your route is on a road, you don't go out that after 2 p.m. on Sundays, because everybody's drinking and trying to get home at that point. So you just kind of learn how to observe those patterns, and then you learn how to move with them and keep those schedules. And that can actually contribute a lot towards safety.
That's fascinating. Are these things that you just picked up while you were out there, or is this from reading other blogs? You mentioned boots on the ground. Like, what combination of processes led you to these revelations?
I think the foundation of it was having been raised as a third culture kid and learning how to do mirroring as a survival tactic from an early age. And that was actually one of the hardest parts of reintegrating, is having all of my senses open and receptive, and I would be responding to perceived on down the road threats that in this environment are not going to become anything, but in Latin America or in wilder or more natural environments are a helpful track. So like learning how to kind of shut down some of those sensors for the self-preservation in the sound tank that is society.
Yeah.
Has been one heck of a transition. But so I think having being raised as a third culture kid, reading the Across the Andes blogs was helpful to kind of contrast what their experience was like. And then largely it was on the ground thing. Like I had found every single person who I could who'd walked the length of South America, and I had those dudes' emails and I had their phone numbers. And so whether I was stressing out about something or, just looking to, reminisce, like the oldest of us is George Megan. And he was like, he was like, oh yeah, I remember walking through Peru, Shining Path were active. And I'm like, oh yeah, like I'm coming through in the wake of Shining Path. Here's, so there was some just interesting to compare notes, but there was also a lot of grounding. And then within that being able to translate the difference of a male's experience and a female's experience, like knowing that that's a huge blind spot that isn't going to be accounted for. And then being able to corroborate that with my hiking partner. So it was a lot of triangulating the skills. And yeah, reading what I could was always helpful, but I also found listening to people a lot more helpful. And one of the things I definitely learned in the US is people would be like, oh, don't go to Mexico. And I'd be like, oh, have you been to Mexico? And they're like, no. So I also learned that like everybody's going to give you their information and their opinion, and you just kind of have to find ways to suss out what their actual context is. Because if it's just what's coming out of the TV, that's not going to help you really in any way.
Yeah. Is it easy to spot a gangster? Like, is it obvious there's a gun on them, they're wearing certain colors, or is it something that you have to be paying astute attention to, like fine details?
It depends if it's an area where they want to be noticed.
Okay.
In some areas, right, it's tattooing, and they're pretty proud of that. Or if they're there as more of a deterrent, there will be evidence. There are certain areas where they had PVC pipe to look like guns. And in those situations, I just went to my teacher self and, like would speak in like simple English and like be really friendly. And that was definitely like passing a Shining Path encampment was sort of where we went through like a line of like 10 dudes in like black masks, like holding things. And I'm like, what are you guys doing here? And nobody answered. And I was like, are you playing soccer? And they were like, yeah. And I was like, I love soccer. I hope your team wins. And we like hike on. And then I was like, that was kind of a weird situation. And we got to the next town and they're like, that's the Shining Path. Like, so yeah, I was like, but my hint had been like, it's too hilly to be good soccer country. So what's going on there? But fortunately, I didn't realize till afterwards.
Yeah.
Can you elaborate a little bit on the Shining Path that I'm not familiar.
It was largely, I believe, in like the late 80s, early 90s, some of the academics in Peru trying to like push back in the wake of the time of the US's Operation Condor, where we just sort of tried to like take out all of communism in South America, and socialism is also bad because of that. And my understanding of the Shining Path is that it was an academic-based like socialism movement that became violent.
Yeah.
And
So
there's certain
remnants
districts and re-strengthening at this point. Like there's a lot of narrative shift happening. And so, safety, I'm advising a couple of folks who are meandering around Latin America for varying periods of time. And there's a lot of pieces that are moving right now. So I wouldn't be surprised if in the next 5 years, the good countries to visit will have like flipped on their head.
So I'm looking at your map. I see that there's a jump from central Mexico over to Baja. Give us a story there.
El Chapo's son had been, I think it was like he'd been arrested recently, and there's generally a balance of power between like the mafia and the government, and the people, right? And but that balance had been thrown off, and so there was just a lot of like big shootings happening. And right as we were getting into the area, I had like read some reports of like 2 SUVs of like mothers and children have just been found gunned down on the side of the road, and I was like, that's not really an environment where I want to figure out bike packing. And there's a route along the Baja Divide, and so that was a really interesting, like, Southern California, like it's Baja California, and actually it was discovered first, and they thought that it was an island and that was California, and then it got extended like north into the US, and so the people in Baja are kind of pissed because they're like, we were California, you guys should be Alto California. Now we're just low, like, what are you talking about?
Was it discernibly safer feeling in Baja?
Yes.
Is there not a cartel presence, or is it just less?
I would say that, again, I think that the cartel is more of serves a purpose of checks and balances in power with the government. There's not a whole ton of difference. They're structured the same, and sometimes they even serve the same purposes. So I don't know, just some of the other places that I've stayed also in Mexico, like, you just be respectful and you just don't ask what somebody does, and if they don't answer, then you supply a banal answer and they'll let you go with that. But let's just say, like, the fishing industry is well established.
Okay, so you land over in Baja. Are you starting in Cabo? And I know that's a pretty deserty area. Are you still bike packing at this point?
So that had actually been, I think because of COVID, we had flipped, and I had just hiked the Continental Divide Trail and then flipped down and rode the Baja Divide south, and then we rode back down to connect to our route in Nicaragua.
Got it. Okay.
So that was like the beginning of bike packing for me. So I rode the Camino del Diablo for a little bit along the Arizona-New Mexico border. I wanted to see what was going on with the wall at that time. And then we met up and rode south.
Did you have any, I've heard from people who've like tried to camp near the border of like even the CDT. And I imagine traveling along the border, did you have any weird encounters with like law enforcement or anything as you were kind of checking out that area?
I approached the law enforcement in those environments as I did in other countries, and just minded my own business. They did ask us, they would ask you to like check in certain places. Probably the most interesting thing that I saw along there was the blue water containers that people will leave out for really any life trying to like make it through the desert environments, and recognizing those as the assets that they were, and also knowing not to camp anywhere near them. And at that time I was kind of trending towards an interest that I continue to have, which is other than human lives that are dependent on these resources and these things that we create. Like when there's a forest fire and you all of a sudden see all of these animal tracks on the trail that you've been hiking, and you realize like we built a highway for all of these animals to get away. Like, how cool is that? Or in the wintertime when there's deep snow and you see like a little fox walking along the trail, like that gives me a sense of like, we've given something. The other species dig it. You know, you don't see them walking on the highways because instead you see roadkill, but those sort of like corridors are very helpful. And so the water was the same way. Just realizing that all of life centers around that and how to be respectful about it. And then, 2 weeks later, reading about, I think it's not so much the law enforcement as those who take law enforcement upon themselves. And, folks going out there and like splitting the water barrels open with axes and shooting them and being like,
there's so much more of an impact than what, that reminds me of, this is it could be a myth of the trail, but leaving from the southern terminus of the CDT, we had people sort of, I don't know if fearmonger is the right word, but they would say, like, if you find a bag in the desert, don't stay anywhere near that. And like, I can see the logic behind the water, absolutely. But that reminded me of those, they said like, if you found like some sort of like backpack or something that wasn't, obviously like a hiker's backpack, that you should stay away from that, and that people were probably watching it. And I feel like that was maybe made up. I'm just curious if you heard anything like that or had any experience with anything like that.
I had an experience when we first went back to Mexico, and I was just getting used to bike packing, and I had a little backpack on, and we stopped for ice cream after like a whole hour and a half, and then we went flying off and flew down this huge hill and climbed another one, and I was having a whooping heyday, and I was feeling so light and airy, and then I realized it's because I didn't have my stupid backpack on. And I had all of these preconceived notions of like, oh, it's going to be gone, like you're in Mexico, like da-da-da-da. And I ride all the way back, and it was a conscious effort in the negative headspace that I was in to remember to be polite and like continue to greet people. Like that's one of the big complaints that I heard is like, you guys don't greet people. I'm like, well, yeah, in our country it's not, you know, and maybe in some of the rural areas, but there it's very much a matter of manners. And I make it back to this little colmado, and it's like 2 or 3 hours later, it's evening time, like half the community are gathered around chatting, and my backpack is just sitting right there, like right where I had left it. So I think the interesting thing to look at is be like, what in your thinking is like, oh, there's a random bag, I should go rustle through that. Like that's just
very,
generally
I think because in that context it was like they're in the middle of the desert. It's not like, you know, somebody left this here because they were, you know, forgot it behind after eating lunch or something. But yeah, that's a really neat story.
I think that just generally though, like mind your own business is a huge part of survival when you're moving through environments that you're not entitled to. And one of the things that I struggle with is seeing people bring a lot of entitlement out of the first world into places where it isn't applicable, and being like, well, it is applicable to me. And that always rubs people the wrong way, whether it's people who may become violent with you or whether it's the people who are inviting you into their home and then are just going to not invite the next white person into their home, because a lot of us are like, oh, I'm doing something so, and this is, I am at fault for this. I'm doing something so cool that this magic that's coming my way is somehow deserved, when really what we're capitalizing on is these other cultures' emphasis on hospitality. And then we just don't reciprocate because we don't come from a gift-giving economy. And we're like, oh, obviously I'm just this great that they were delighted to feed me and clean up after me and do my dishes. And so then I'm just going to leave. And it's like, did you leave anything? Like, because you don't, gift economies function on reciprocity, and we are so linear. It's like we expect to have the price laid out before we register for it, but these are more of like what is given, what is taken throughout. And if we consistently show ourselves to be a form of traveler who don't know how to feed into those systems, it's going to burn out. And I think that's already starting to happen. I've started to see in Central America. And when we're talking about, you know, were you as safe in some of these areas, it's because they're at that level of burnout that they've given as much generosity as they could and had it repeatedly violated and are starting to become salty about it. And that is in turn making it unsafe for those who are following the blogs of people, of those of us who got to go in the heyday of it, like a decade before, and people weren't as burnt out. And then you go there and you're like, wait, this is really like expensive and everybody's crabby. And it's like, well, because
they've been burned.
Yeah.
And you see that even in, I think, like North American trail communities, when there's been, it only takes like one or two people who create a really terrible experience for someone for that to then become something that people remember every time they see a thru-hiker. And, you know, it's unfortunate because there are, I think, a lot of people who don't take it for granted. But if you have, you know, only even a small percentage of mass amounts of people that are taking those things for granted and not leaving a positive impact, you definitely see people start to resent the entire community.
Like the donation-based hostels and shuttles and that sort of thing. Like, if enough people are not opting into that service goes away.
Well, but it's been interesting to watch the evolution of trail magic, and I've gone through like a wide range of emotions on it. From like back when I started thru-hiking in like 2010, which is not that long ago in my opinion, but according to some people, they're like, oh, like that was you hiked a long ass time ago. But like, there was no structure to the magic, right? It would just appear where it did, and it was given out of that grace. And then as critical mass has been reached, it has evolved into businesses, you know, and there's trail angels that it's like, for this amount, for $80, I'll like take you back to the trailhead, because we're people who are used to having those structures built in, and otherwise many of us don't understand how to like meet those needs. And so then we just saw like a whole era of trail angels just kind of like go off of the market, and in their place arose the hostels. And I think that's a natural part of growth. Like I'm experiencing it in my own life after, 20 or 30 years of being like, don't worry, the magic will carry me. And now I'm starting to be like, okay, well, also maybe some structure. And being able to like plan and budget more than 6 months out, that kind of thing. So I think part of it is just natural evolution of growth, and particularly with growth of users. And also I felt it so intensely for the first 6 months of coming back, and it's only a pale comparison for some of the people who have to like live around us from other cultures, that it's really embarrassing, man. Like I spent a lot of time feeling really embarrassed for people who had no shame, and then they would still come out ahead because they would just like demand and take and walk away, and then they would burn it for the other people, and I was like losing myself in resentment for that. I was like, this isn't what this is about, and how do we address it? Like, how do we promote that awareness? Because it's really hard if you aren't raised in those kind of cultures to like learn. I did a lot of explaining with my hiking partner and being like, no, like you need to sit up and listen to their stories. I know that you're tired. Like, I know you don't understand everything they're saying, but all you have to do is laugh when they laugh. Like, pretend, for the love of God, please. Like, and now it's really hard to translate. So if people haven't had those opportunities, like a guided experience or like a house parent for a language, then there really is no context for it. And we're going to keep running those lines then.
So specifically in the Latin American cultures that you're speaking of, where they have more of a gift-giving culture, somebody who's doing the frugal style backpacking, how would you advise that they participate in that type of culture? Because that's difficult, right? Obviously, you only have limited possessions with you, usually very budget strapped, not to say that the people out there that are helping you are financially well off, but what would you recommend to the travelers to participate in that?
So I think that structure is another one that we're trapped in the first world of like, you need to be giving back, like that exchange is necessarily going to be monetary, and that like we have thinned down the value of exchange to something as thin as like a bill. The most valuable things that you can give to people is your time, and to dignify and to honor their stories. And I found that was a large part of the work that I ended up doing, was just sitting and receiving the stories. And I think that was one of the particular capacities that I brought to it as an empath, because sitting with these people in these remote environments, their story became my story. Whatever they said was true for them was true for me. And I had to go back out into nature by myself for like 3 to 5 days to sort of like shake that out and be like, oh wait, I don't feel that way. Like that was that person's. But many people who live in rural environments, like having an interesting actual human interaction, and someone to listen to their stories, are very important components. I also integrated an aspect of bringing food, some sort of like food stuff. In the Cunayala, Eileen taught me, we brought popcorn, and they knew her on many of the islands. So like the grandmas would come running over with like a beat up old kettle, like, and they'd start collecting, they would, just coconuts, and they would, to make the oil, and we would like popcorn and sit around and like tell stories. And I think that's one of the things that, again, it's like, can you offer it if you don't have it? Can you give it if you don't have it to offer? But the capacity to sit in conversation for hours and to give companionably. Another component that can be given besides like time and dignifying their stories, is labor. If you're going to, and you can't make it like a linear, like, oh, well, you fed me, so I'm gonna, but you just kind of like notice things. And that's one of the things that, we definitely skated past as women often and didn't end up doing, like, as much as what I've heard, like male counterparts who've traveled the Americas, like people seem far more willing to ask those guys to like help out. But contributing labor, and I think part of that contributing labor is, and bringing this back to one of the earlier topics, is like giving humility. Like, I gave a talk for Alda West, talking about the struggles of like vegetarianism when traveling through regions where meat is a primary part of the diet. And if you're going to some of these remote environments, like a place in Chile, there was this fellow who must have gone hiking through before us, and this family had invited us in, and they're like, yeah, one of you recently went through here. And that could mean anywhere from like 2 months to like 2 years ago. And they're like, it was crazy. Like, that man ate rocks. And I was like, what? And they're like, he only drank water and ate rocks. We tried to feed him. And he just said no to everything. And like, in their minds, they couldn't even conceive of someone who would like reject food, because that's such a basic thing of bonding. And that was also one of the hard parts of coming back to the U.S. is like trying to share food with people, and it being like, it was deeply offensive to me. And that was only after like some years of experience in these cultures and some background. I can't imagine coming from that and being like, I have made this food for you, and someone rejecting it. But it's like, if those are your values, then by all means hold to them, but don't make it about like, well, I have superior values to you. You know, degrade yourself. Be like, I get explosive diarrhea when I eat meat. Like, nobody's going to ask you.
True.
Yeah, which is also, like you can also be telling the truth, but you don't have to make it.
Can you do me a favor and say that in Spanish right now?
Me da un gran dolor del estómago si como carne.
Yeah. I'm just going to assume that was correct.
Okay. But yeah, so letting yourself not be at the top, like, you know, be willing to show up humbly and be like, I just need water and I'm happy to do some labor for you. Because there's a lot of like very deep hierarchy things that we have been privileged enough to like graze past that many of us are not aware of, or angles that we play that maybe we don't know that we play. They're just so ingrained in our culture that out there means something very different. So learning how to be mindful about that and accept generosity when it's offered, and be willing to, I spent a lot of time meditating between humility and humiliation. You know, they're so close and also so like distinctly different. And I experienced both throughout. And I think that's one of the components of resilience that made it possible.
Fascinating. So we should also mention that we're jumping the timeline here because the CDT was before the majority, or I guess all of the Central American journey. I guess you'd started and then COVID happened.
Yeah,
and then
before Nicaragua, between Nicaragua and Mexico.
Yeah. Excuse me. You know, I don't want to yada the CDT, but we've obviously talked to a lot of CDT hikers. So if there's any like standout stories from the journey that you'd like to offer, I also think it's probably important to touch on. I know that you and Neon had taken different routes through the U.S. So I guess I'll just let you steer this part of this, but I don't want to get too deep in the weeds on the CDT just because you've done so many unique things that we've talked about the CDT ad nauseum already.
What I really appreciate a lot about doing the CDT, and most of all was being able to see the change in the thru-hiking culture over the course of a decade, basically. I hiked the PCT in 2010 and then the CDT in 2019, and seeing sort of what I've been talking about earlier, you know, the evolution of like trail angels and just from heart and generosity to then realizing like there need to be boundaries, to it, you know, being standardized in some environments like it is over in the Appalachian Trail, very much so at this point, and that's a necessary component of that growth. I am so impressed with what Teresa and the folks at the Continental Divide Trail are doing. What is it?
Coalition. Yeah,
the Continental Divide Trail Coalition are doing in terms of a mindful and holistic approach to respectful engagement of the land, and understanding that education is really important, not only within our own happy little like nucleus, but also of the larger community, because that's what's going to continue to give the trails life, is cultivating those relationships. I think that was one of the big things that struck me. Another one is, just the much larger user groups and just the interesting like I was hiking with like 2 military guys and a tattoo piercing artist. And we were right on the fringe of this like 10 or 12 person size trail family. And it was really interesting because it was kind of like a soap opera, you know, but like a soap opera that got really inconvenient if you're trying to find services in town. Then it was interesting to observe how they like functioned like with a group that large. They would just call for a shuttle to come from the hotel that they were going to like totally rent out before anybody else got to town. Or seeing people like calling for Ubers instead of hitching, like that was my little like old lady like, well, that, and then looking at someone using not gut hook, far out. and having a line on their phone and they hadn't even downloaded the background.
I can't imagine that on the CDT, to be honest.
Right? That's kind of what I thought, but it turned out that I mean, it was successful, and
I guess you could make it work, but that'd be scary.
Is that just out of ignorance of not knowing how the app works, or is it just?
It could. I've had stuff on download before, and it could be they just didn't realize they could get the topos, but it could also be. I mean, you can totally get away with that from my experience, like on the PCT, and whereas there's certainly situations where I wanted the topos on the PCT as well, but in my experience on the CDT, I wanted the topos all the time, personally, just from the way things can shake out.
Sure. Well, because what are you going to do if you don't have trail math to do, man? Yeah. Like, if I'm not add something up or like counting down to my next snack, then what am I supposed to do out here? Like meditate?
Yeah.
But I don't know. I just saw a vast change in the services, and yeah, those northern states, they're their own secrets, right? There's like, I just felt like Wyoming was like Wyoming's best kept secret. I really liked crossing the Red Desert. I crossed it at night, and there was like a fire burning off to the side, like on a full moon night with wild horses stampeding around.
It's the weirdest place I've ever been.
So yeah,
it's bizarre.
It is outside of time and temperatures. And I think that was one of the things that I realized after having been hiking, as I had, is like I had learned to just adapt my schedule to whatever the day gave me. And then coming back here, I sat down with a guy, and he was like, "It rains every single day when I stop for lunch." And he's like, "And I stop for lunch at 1 p.m. And I'm like, "Well, what if you stop for lunch at noon?" And he's like, "No, I stop for lunch at..." And I was like, "Oh." And he was like, "I hike from dawn till dusk." And I was like, "Well, what if the day is really hot? Like, I would just sleep through the heat of the day." And I just realized that I think when you have the chance to like sit back and plan it, you might get really attached to the structure that you put to it. And if you end up like getting battered around enough out in the wilderness, you're just kind of like, you just go when you can and you collapse when you can't.
Do you think your Her Odyssey adventure has made you a better thru-hiker? Because it certainly sounds like it requires a heaping dose of adaptability to the situation, which is an awesome trait to have as just like a general thru-hiker as well. Do you feel like that has made you more adaptable as a thru-hiker?
I think it's broken me as a thru-hiker. I think for about a decade there, I was really attached to the idea of thru-hiking as being some sort of like peak of performance, and like this is the real legitimate experience. And then when I was doing the CDT in 2019, I did it SOBO, and sitting down with there was like 4 Knowlesy boys, and we were still up in, I think we were in the Bob, and watching these boys all sit around and like make bread in their pan, and like 4 voracious like 20-something-year-old guys like waiting for bread to be made was just like really interesting to like eat my macaroni and cheese and watch that happen. And then having a conversation with them and then being like, yeah, we're gonna thru-hike the CDT, and drawing from the context, and I don't know like what they went on and ended up doing, but to sit back and say, like you don't have to thru-hike for it to be a successful experience. And talking to people on the Great Divide Trail who've been like hiking sections of that trail over 10 years and hearing the depth of knowledge that they have of like, oh, well, this summer of like 2018 was like this, and you can like cherry pick like when you go hike the larches. And so it's like, I think I went in a direction of like esteeming thru-hiking as the only authentic experience to, at this point, that concept has become so brittle to me that, and exclusive almost, that it's burning out. And I see the value a lot in those who consistently give time and energy to these things, or who keep coming back to them over and over again. So I think it's kind of, it sounds pretentious, but like kind of moved me beyond the attachment to that.
Sure. Yeah. It's destroyed your level of purism.
Yeah, I find it interesting when people speak about a trail in the context of like conquering it. And I feel like based on what you were kind of talking about, you see it more as like it's an experience to go through, not necessarily something that you're conquering or, overpowering, I guess. Like it's you're going through what it will allow you to go through and adapting to that as
Mm-hmm.
you journey through, I guess.
Yeah, and becoming and letting it like shape you into something different. I think there's very much that concept of, and even in the language of like the stuff that like makes headlines is like we talk about like shattering records or defeating records. Why isn't it like built upon? You know, that person who went before established connections, like they are the reason that the resources that you need are in that next town. So why are we constantly like tearing each other down in order to like build someone up? Because then all you have is like 5 minutes of like loneliness as opposed to understanding like the community that you are a part of.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I'm just going to say this. I've never thru hiked. Every single trail, it started by accident. My first thru hike was the Pacific Crest Trail, and there was a fire, and we had to like get into a van and ride around it. And every single trail at some point, whether I've just started from the opposite side of the road that I got dropped off, I've left some sort of intentional, after that first one accidental, some sort of intentional break so that I wouldn't become, because I know I'm the kind of person who would become attached to that identity. So I'm extremely like cautious about that in myself. And so sort of, you know, in a lot of, in the Muslim faith, for example, if they're going to make like an elaborate piece of artwork with some of the mosaics, they'll always leave some sort of like error in it just to like acknowledge the human component. And that was a big part of, you know, breaking from just the thru hiking on Her Odyssey and letting it be, okay, we travel as the locals travel. I'm not here to like, you know, it would definitely started with those concepts of like, I'm going to be the first. And now in the retrospect, right after I finished thru hiking, I found a book that makes mention of a woman who walked the length of the Americas 100 years before me, but there's almost no record of her. There's only one record when she was walking with the suffragettes in the United States, and they're like, what are you going to do next? And she's like, I'm going to walk from South America to the snow line of Alaska. And then I was reading this account of this woman who's in South America. They were telling her, no, you can't go this way. And then someone was like, oh, do you remember that lady? And that was very much how we got through South America. Is like if one other person had done it, or if you could cite one other person who'd done it, they would let you go on. And this whole idea of like, oh, this is all new and like revolutionized. Like, no, there was some broad out here 100 years ago with a dog, like doing it. There is no first, like there is no great, and there is nothing that's done alone. And obviously get really fired up about that because I think that it's a big balance between North and South right now, these like narratives of the individual versus the collective. And I think that's one of the greater and more significant shifts that I see happening in our narrative right now, is people are coming around to appreciating the collective and the understanding of the patience that's necessary in order for that to function.
Yeah, well said. Again, I don't want to yada yada the CDT. I think what you offered so far is very interesting, and just the contrast of how it was a decade prior is also very interesting. But I would like to get north of the border if we can.
Ooh, yeah, let's do it.
Because you lit up when you talked about the Great Divide Trail.
Oh,
So let's start there.
okay. I really love Canada. They're nothing like us, but they let us think that they are. But just their approach to things is that was a really subtle one to get to like apply some of the cultural observation and the mirroring to. I love the Great Divide Trail Association they're kind of like the Luke Skywalker. Like they're the rebel forces. Like that trail has been built on like love and is maintained like that. They don't have the designations that we do, but they're working on it. They're working on like growing up into that. So getting to like hike the trail at that like in between period when it's like, well, the trail goes through an area of the park that other users don't use, so there's no maintenance to the trails whatsoever. And then just the Sharky character of the Rockies. I mean, it's a whole different mountain vibe up there.
So the Luke Skywalker of trails.
Yeah. So I just love the Great Divide Trail Association. I really like those like gritty, down to earth, just like bootstraps, literal bootstraps. Bootstraps and flagging, I'm pretty sure, is the thing that holds that trail together. And that was also a really cool experience to befriend the community in Banff through Little Buddha. Have you guys gotten to have?
Yes, I was gonna see if you touched on the Pangea Traverse at all.
Yes, definitely go follow Little Buddha. Like,
Not familiar. The name's maybe vaguely familiar.
Yeah,
Little Buddha is a thru hiker.
I mean, yeah, you probably know more about it than I do, but he's a thru hiker. He started on the ECT he's doing Pangea Traverse, so connecting all of the continents via how they would have been connected by foot. And he started on the ECT, I believe, in last year.
Okay.
So he's completed that portion, and I'm not sure where he is right now. I imagine.
Yeah, I think he's done like the entire part of this coast. He's coming out with like new information about it right now. I got to be in Banff for the release of a film about his story of like coming up out of like Hmong refugees, and he's just go check him out and have him on the show. He's doing great stuff, and I think has more miles than any reasonable person, any sane person has logged. One time I gave him a ride with like 6 other thru hikers on the CDT, and we played the whole like add up how many miles are in the car, and like those legs carried it for the car. So wait, where did that get started? Little Buddha fangirl.
Yeah, you were talking about the GDT and like the way.
Right.
How did that?
So Lil Buddha introduced me to the Banff community, to Leslie and Keith, and the thru hikers, and then through them and putting in time with them, I was trying to figure out this paddling route that I wanted to do, but I had no experience with canoeing. And through the strange annals of the community / meeting the internet, someone had been like, "Oh, you need to like find X." I'm not going to say his name because he would be very upset. And I could only find like one paper that this person had written about badgers. And I found his like name site, and I was like, I can't find this guy. So then I go home to like Keith and Leslie, and I was like, man, I'm trying to find this guy. I'm told this is who I need to talk to in order to like understand how to canoe this route, but I can't find him. And they're like, oh, he lives across the street. And they were like, you go back to the trail, because we were still hiking the trail. They're like, you go hike, and like, you know, I'll run into his wife on an evening walk one day. I'll kind of lay the idea, and then we'll find a moment when like you guys could meet. And then a couple weeks later, Keith took me over to like X's house, and X opens the door, and he was like, you are the one who wants to ask me about canoeing. And I was like, yeah. And he was like, well, you'll put your boat into the water and you'll point it north. And I was like, great, thanks. That's all that I need. Yeah. And he just started off with that sort of like that dry, like Canadian wit, like that, yeah, bud. But then showed up every single step of the way and like connected with the community, like helped us get a canoe like third hand. It belonged to the college and then the Boy Scouts, and the Boy Scouts were selling it off, but it was like the kind of material that we wanted a canoe made out of. And
what kind of material?
What is it called?
Is it the fiberglass?
No. You don't want fiberglass. That's what it is. It's Royal X.
Okay.
And it's not made anymore, right? Because there's all the ultralight stuff has taken over, so the old hardy durable stuff has been like edged out. But we were able to get like this very precious old boat. And then also through having the time in those communities, and other supporters from the thru-hiking community also reached out and helped us kind of understand about moving into First Nations territories and understanding how to navigate that respectfully, and combining that with some of the ancestral lands that we pass through in South and Central America. Often those would just sort of be being respectful upon arrival and knowing the greeting rituals, and, you know, asking to talk to the right person and having like gifts or ofrendas of some kind. Whether in the form of time, but this was an opportunity that you could reach out to people ahead of time. And I forget what it was. It was coming into Fort Smith. I believe the Dene folk, and I had sent an email and asked for permission to come through, just kind of let them know our plans, like our rough timeline. And of all of the borders that I've had to cross, the ones with Indigenous folk were the gentlest and the kindest and the warmest. Like, some of the emails came back with like, okay, these are when our treaty days are, like, be there. We ended up getting put up. You know, it's extremely expensive living up there, but like one of the towns like put us up for like 2 or 3 nights through like a lot of rain just so we could attend treaty days. Coming into Fort Smith, I had
Tell me about treaty days before we move on.
Oh man, I don't have a lot of knowledge on it, so I'm a little bit embarrassed, but my understanding of it is that Treaty Days honors when the First Nations signed contracts with the Crown, like these, like this was before Canada existed, right? And somewhere, the main thing that I remember from the Treaty Days, so they celebrate like the signing of this, and somewhere into the contract, based on money at that time. They had written in that every single person should get $5. And that's still in effect. So basically, the communities all come together. Folks come in and they play hand games, which don't ask me what those are, except for fascinating to watch. And you're never going to figure out what's going on. But there's somewhere between like 10 and 20 people involved, and like trickery and sticks and a lot of shouting. It's super fun. But they play a lot of traditional games, and they have these big feeds. The community feeds would be like the kids would be cooking. And then you gather your $5 and they would have ceremonies and speaking, and it was, a lot of like the ritual, like gifting tobacco to the elders. It was an amazing thing to behold and to be invited in as a tourist and like welcomed for what we were and not feel like an interloper. And the dancing, it's something that I've appreciated on so many places that I've been, is like seeing the intergenerational component of like grandmothers out there dancing at the same time as like little tinies, and then the women who are like at their prime and leading it. It was so cool.
That's fascinating.
Yeah,
that's really cool.
Yeah, but like coming into Fort Smith, getting an email, that was the point. One of the requests for permission to cross came back with just a beautifully written email and like a blessing, and like asking that like the spirits of the ancestors like bless your passing, and if there's anything that you need, come by. That never happened at any of the legal border crossings.
They weren't blessing your passing.
Yeah, that's cool.
So this is where you're putting into the water, and this is taking you all the way to the Arctic Ocean.
Yeah, so we ended up putting in a town called Hinton outside of Jasper, because I think that's one of the other things, like we really threaded the needle with Her Odyssey in terms of climate crisis. So if I like rewind back and kind of integrate talking about like through hiking the CDT and the PCT, some of my original trail family from the PCT were Triple Crowners. And they're pure no-bow. They did them within 1 or 2 years. And, they draw a lot of identity from it. And it's really fun. And I finally just had to say to one of them, and, he was like razzing me for going SOBO on the CDT. And I was like, you're talking from a place of climate privilege, buddy. Because right now, like, a lot of people aren't able to finish because things are catching on fire. People are dying of, like, heat exhaustion because things not only socially, but also in terms of the landscape around us, everything is becoming more extreme. And so the year that we started paddling, it was such a late spring that all of the snow was still held up in the mountains, and where we had planned to put in was just like a mud, like literally the lake where we went to put in, there was like a bunch of mountain goats walking across sand dunes. And we just kind of like stood there and we're like, well, guess we have to go down river to the old pulp mill. So I think that was another part of Her Odyssey that I've really appreciated, is recognizing that what you accomplish is completely at the whim of what nature is going to provide you. You can't guarantee an outcome. Like this whole putting human will above nature, I see the romance of it in the same way as I see the romance of the concept of through hiking. And also you come to a certain point past it where you realize it's a really brittle concept, and maybe you need to like lay your will aside to recognize there's bigger forces at play, and what can I do with all of the carbon emissions that I'm burning and all of the like productive working and breeding years that I'm not using. How can I leverage this story to bring the story around into a more comprehensive vision, and one that's more empathetic for points of view that maybe don't fit with our own.
So where you want to put in is dried up.
Yep.
Mountain goats.
So we ended up going down below the old pulp mill about like 12 miles on down, and then we paddled the Athabasca to the Athabasca River to the Slave River to the ditch, or what we call the Mackenzie River. It was the great big like outflow, and that was just really interesting, like during pollen season, and just being like you're in the boreal forest, like one of the largest remaining forests, and there's just a lot of horny trees, and the whole river's just like orange, and you got like tree jizz up your nose, and it's just, and you're out there in the middle of nowhere, man, for so long. It's something that photographs can't explain, and it's something you can only experience is when you're in these landscapes that are so vast that they make a mountain look small, and then you're even that much smaller. Like, you know, in my own personal journey from having like been raised in a really strict faith and then finding my own, or a strict Christian faith, and then having like sort of built my own faith on the trail, and then realizing how that assimilates with the greater whole. There's like, I have a lot of, I'm not going to kneel down. I'm not going to kneel down to any like God or any like building or anything that it is because there's some sort of like prescript to do so. But I will kneel before the truly powerful things that matter, like children or white water. And I just had this moment like paddling around Banff, like during our training, being like coming up on some white water and getting on my knees and just looking up at the mountains and just being like, I would drop to my knees for this view any day. Like, and I would do so with like full honor, and I would feel privileged to bow down before these landscapes. And it felt like that all the way through the north as the land got bigger and bigger, and it swallowed you into this little tiny insignificant thing. I loved it.
Just before we move on, do you suffer from allergies? Imagine going through a river that's orange from pollen. That'd be a tough place to survive if your allergies are bad.
You have a reaction to it, definitely. I think that's one of the components of the nature of travel. And I know. It applies both to the internal biomes and the external biomes. When you're like constantly in a new environment, you're constantly reacting to it. Like talking to the indigenous folks up north, like they would leave they'd let their kids get bit by mosquitoes when they're young, because then like they build up a tolerance for it and they're not as bothered by it. But when you're something like new and juicy, constantly running through, whether we're talking about like gut bacteria or mosquitoes, they're like, a new system to play with.
I wonder if that just made me think of when I was a kid in Canada. Like, my family visited Canada a lot, and I remember one summer I just got devoured. And I wonder if that was picked up from indigenous people in the area. That I have no idea. But I just remember, ever since then, my mosquito bites have not been as bad. I barely react to them.
Yep.
But
that's interesting.
Yeah, I don't know if there's, I don't know what, yeah, but just you saying that triggered that memory.
And there's different species of mosquitoes. That's the other thing that you learn in like going through all these environments. And like, if you sit there long enough, that was one of the interesting things on the meditation retreat, was like watching mosquitoes bite me and doing nothing about it.
Oh, that's where I would collapse for sure.
Yeah,
that'd
be hard.
But like you just watch your reaction to it.
Yeah.
And then you're like, oh, like how much of a and they were really nice mosquitoes. Like those do, like, I don't know, but Thai mosquitoes, they're not like the itchy kind. They're just like, I just want some blood. Like it wasn't like North American mosquitoes where I'm then trying to, but I'd say the worst ones, I mean, the black flies up there were pretty bad, but there was like these biting flies down in Chile that were like striped. And I called them Lazarus bugs, because you'd like strike them and they would fall and then they would like come back. The worst. But I got reminded by an old indigenous fella named Jumbo. We were leaving one town, and he had let us like store our boat in his yard, and then he was walking back to his house, and he turned back and he came back down. Like, it was a very important thing for him to say. And he's like, and don't forget to let some of the mosquitoes bite you. Those girls need to eat too. And he had explained, it like clicked something in, because he had been talking about like the movement, the shifts in their fishing population, which is what they count on. The whitefish is based on, it's a 1-year lag to what the mosquito population was. So because this year, the year that we went through, had been so suppressed for the insects, they knew the next year would be a bad year for the fish. And so he had this like greater concept of the cycle of things going around. And then I think that's kind of one of the components that I was talking about earlier in terms of giving time. Like, I felt really honored. Then about a year ago, I got an email from this lady randomly who was like, I finally found your website. I wanted to send you these pictures I took of you. She'd been in the boat with Jumbo when they had seen us coming up to their community, and she sent me the pictures, and I was like, oh, here's a story I remember from him. And she was like, he just passed. Actually. And then being able to be like, please pass this story like to his wife, know that, a rich memory is carried of him out in the wider world. And like that kind of ability to have that communication and to remember and honor their lives and stories and names outside of the home community, I think is one of the greatest gifts that we can give as those of us privileged with travel.
Okay, so I'm trying to chart the route a little bit. So does this the Slave River put you into the Great Slave Lake? Is that right?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay, walk us through the steps
deltas
here.
were boogers, man. They're seriously boogers. Like, the water's creeping. So these are they're super critical biomes, and they are very much being changed by all of the mining that's going on and some of the pollutants that are getting poured into the river. They're hell if you're trying to paddle, because they're these huge, open, flat, basically still bodies of water. So if a wind comes up, even though technically the current, but in those areas, like, there isn't so much of a current. So you're fighting for everything, and they're wide open, but then there's also all of these, it's like a labyrinth, without a guarantee that you're going to, like, make it through that labyrinth, because there might be a log jam has been, like, built up, but the reeds are so thick. So that was a place where pulling satellite imagery and, like, taking pictures of it on the phone and charting the route through it, just trying to, like, have a route downloaded wouldn't have worked. But then I started being like, it's really weird, because, like, in some areas you would see a lot of trash, but once you're getting out that far north, you don't really see a lot of trash. And we would see these like Tide jugs. And then I was like, hang on a second. And Eagle Eye Lauren was, like, really good at Spanish. She's like, and that stick has been cut. And so we would, like, go over there and realize that this was how, like, the locals who would have gone through on boats, they would, like, just tie these, like, jugs, milk jugs, or, like, Tide jugs along the canals that you would be able to find your way through, that will be entirely different next year. Only the people on the ground know their way through. So we're literally following, like, the garbage trail, to get to where we're going, by people who are creative enough to, like, use trash to mark the way. Like, how resilient is that?
Yeah. How much of a learning curve is this? Because you mentioned that you didn't have any canoeing experience. Did Neon?
Neon fluidly speaks the language of nature and adapted well to, like, being able to read water and work with it. And I think, again, like, what you were kind of going back to what you were saying about, like, the conqueror mindset is, like, by that point, at so many levels, our thinking had become, like, how can I work with nature to get to where I'm going? Like, because originally, right, my vision had been to, like, walk through it, but then I read a book about some people who walked the Yellowstone to Yukon route, and they were like, we had a 1 kilometer day. And I was like, okay, I had one of those in Patagonia, and I don't need to have another one. And then I'd been route planning, and Google Maps glitched, and it, like, scooted me over to this river highway that basically led to where we were going. And so when we put the boat into the river, it was like, it's all downhill from here. Like, how often does a thru-hiker get to say that? Like, that's a strong argument for multi-sport. But the community in Banff, and the fellow who I mentioned, who I'm calling X to be mysterious, he made sure that we were fully trained and had, like, suits in case there was going to be a windy day. We put a skirt onto it. We modified our canoe to be able to put a skirt onto it. It was definitely at least a month pretty consistently paddling, like, several hours a day. And that largely just came down to the things like, sometimes if you're going into a headwind, you cannot stop paddling. And if you're going to keep paddling, you also have to keep eating every 1 hour. So the logistics of, like, where to physically keep food on your person and be able to keep paddling, that you can, like, it ended up being in, like, spoiler alert, it's in your PFD vest, where you can, like, unzip on one stroke and then reach in on the next stroke and then poke it into your mouth, because if not, you get blown back. I would say that time gave us the time to figure out how to balance a boat was really important, and how to keep ourselves with energy.
Yeah.
Do your caloric needs shoot up way higher during this leg of the journey relative to hiking, bikepacking?
The accessibility of food was really different, because in bikepacking in Central America, we hardly carried food, because, like, why would you be eating a can of tuna when there's a grandma making amazing tacos right there that you can smell up the whole climb? and huge portions of food. And up there, everything was measured out and was a process. I think also the cold.
Yeah.
Kind of takes it out of you, as well as having sunlight from like 3 or 4 a.m. until about 12 p.m. It really confuses your rhythms and like what you should be able to output, and trying to sleep in light, I think, also drains more energy, is my weird little theory.
Yeah, do you have like an eye mask, or are you just so tired that
you just pull your buff?
Yeah, okay.
But yeah.
I'm curious with paddling if you and Neon had any conflict. I feel like people always joke, if you want to test a relationship, you should go on a canoe trip. And I know you had a lot of experience hiking together, but I'm curious if there was anything new that you found out about your dynamic on the canoeing portion.
I think it brought to light that she has a lot of leadership abilities. Like she was always in the back of the boat and like steering, and I had a lot more variable output. By that point, you've kind of talked about everything there is to talk about. So we, somebody had given her an Audible credit, and we got to listen to, who's the guy? All right.
Oh, McConaughey?
Yeah, Matthew McConaughey's book, Green Light.
Why did I think Owen Wilson?
Yeah.
They share a brain space.
Sure. Yeah, and then agreed. Same here. So just listening to like silly things and realizing like at that point, I think also at that point, being 3/4 of the way through the journey, it was sort of the same, like now we're counting down, like going towards the end of it, and just kind of like letting it be what it was, as well as it having been a relationship that we both, that took a lot of weight. And so being able to just like begin to ease up on the gas on that and let go were really big journeys. But it is also weird to have someone behind you and not be able to like look at them very often. You just know they're back there.
Yeah.
I guess what other stories do you want to regale us with from the last leg of this journey?
I mean, I feel like I've already like towed close to the line, so I'm just going to go ahead and get really divisive and political and be like, I am super into umbrellas.
I was like, I'm ready. And then I'm also very into umbrellas, so you won't catch me arguing with that opinion.
I got really into them for the heat in like Central America, and then at some points when I was just kind of like having like low vibes on the CDT, you just like bust that out and pull a couple Mary Poppin leaps, and you're like, dude, I am so much better. And then you're like, oh wait, it's also because I'm not like in the direct line of the sun.
Yeah, shade
it's
is very nice.
It's a huge difference. Yeah. And everyone's jealous.
Yes. Even if
some
they
people
don't
will
know
admit
it.
Yeah. Some will admit it, and I respect those. But some people they're like, why would you carry that? And I'm like, you're just jealous.
Yeah, you just don't know. You just don't know yet, youngling. And I think that was the thing that really sealed it in for me, was getting to spend these last 3 months in Thailand and being like, all of the grandmas in Thailand, a country that is well adapted to the kind of heat that is going to increasingly be faced by people around the planet. Like we're all, used to our like chilly environment, so we're like, meh. But like the people who know heat rock the umbrella, man. Like no doubt. Like, so 2 things I'm bringing back from Thailand is like I'm super into wearing slippers now, and umbrellas. All about it.
Yeah.
Don't feel bad.
Yeah.
I love that you brought that up.
I took that initially to mean that you were using an umbrella during the canoeing portion. That's not accurate, right? I imagine that it would be, or are you? I don't know. I guess with, what is it, 20 hours of sunlight? Maybe
yeah, because you're not really in shade much, and especially in those wide open waters, I would imagine.
No, man, it was nuts. Some places the river was like 3 kilometers wide, so it kind of feels more like you're on a lake or on an ocean. But no, I don't think that we had umbrellas while we were up there. But that was actually where, when we finished in Tuktoyaktuk, the women, the Steen family, and the women of Tuk took us in and kind of let us see a little bit of what their culture is like, in the form of taking us under their wing and helping us make slippers. So we got to like create these like leather slipper, like sealskin slippers, to like, and just each pushing the needle through leather was just a way of, affirming to my feetsies, like, okay, kids, you did great. Like, I'm giving you these amazing slippers. And in that, got to just kind of sit around and understand a little bit, like get just a beautiful snippet of how that community comes together and bonds. And even the men would like ask us how our slippers were coming. Like they were so kind. Everyone was amazing. So yeah, I don't know, man. I've come off of Her Odyssey being like, you know, if you want a thru hike. If you want a section hike. If your thru hike becomes a section hike, it's not any less valid, and you should probably bring an umbrella with you and have some slippers waiting when you get home.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's beautiful. I know, very difficult to summarize what's been a multi-year incredible expedition across 2 continents. But thank you for doing it over the course of 2 interviews now. Please let people know there's a book forthcoming.
Yeah, I'm working on a memoir right now, and yeah, so early stages.
Okay. Obviously, let people know about the website and social media, like wherever you want listeners of Backpacker Radio to go.
Ooh, okay. Where I want you guys to go, most helpful would be if you'd be on my mailing list, and that is on the website www.her-odyssey.org. And you can subscribe to the newsletter there, and it's not something that I use frequently, but that's sort of my database for any time something new comes out. I let those folks know. And we're on Instagram at Her Odyssey. YouTube would actually be really helpful as well, like while you're there signing up for Backpacker Radio. Going over to Her Odyssey, I have a whole video about paddling the Cunayala, so if you're interested in like kayaking, or I have one about bike packing the Baja Divide, if you just need 30 minutes of eye candy in the form of landscape, it would be... Okay, now I'm distracted because there's this one mountain on the Baja Divide that just looked like a layered cake, and I still think about that mountain. But yeah, go follow on YouTube, Instagram, but most of all, if you're willing to be on a newsletter, would be most helpful to me, please.
Cool. Well, we'll include all of those links in the show notes as well for convenience, so if you want to get to them quickly, they'll be there. But Bethany, thank you so much for doing this again. What an incredible journey, and I'm sure that we only scratched the surface in terms of stories and learning lessons, so thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, guys. Thanks for keeping it real.
To the Trek propaganda portion of today's show. Got a couple of news stories for you guys. By the time you hear this, they'll be dated, but that's just the way the cookie crumbles, sorry. The first one is a sad story about 2 people who were attacked, one lethally. The title is One Killed, One Injured in California from a mountain lion attack. This is by Kelly Floro. You can get the gist from the title, obviously. It's a very sad story, but a mountain lion killed a 21-year-old man and injured his 18-year-old brother in El Dorado County, California. On some dates, El Dorado County Sheriff's Office responded to a 911 call from an 18-year-old man who said his brother had been attacked by a mountain lion in a remote part of the county. According to a press release, the 2 had become separated, and the 18-year-old had suffered traumatic injuries to his face during the attack. I don't know... I think the last update that I'd seen on this was that he was expected to make a full recovery, so great there, but obviously a sad, tragic story. And worth highlighting that these are news stories for a reason. If mountain lion attacks were common things, I think this would obviously be a little bit less sensational. Obviously, it doesn't make it any easier for the loved ones of the people there, but just a reminder that I forget the statistic, but it was something like less than 1 person is killed by a mountain lion in North America per year. So
yeah, I think it's even less than that as far as I know.
Yeah.
Very rare.
Very, very rare.
And they're still looking into the
circumstance.
Yeah, what might have caused it.
Yeah.
But yeah, not updated yet.
And the other news story is a much happier one, and we haven't made any headway into actually trying to, but I would love to have this person on the podcast. And the title of this one is Jasmine Paris becomes the first woman ever to complete the Barkley Marathons. I don't know.
Woo!
Yeah, exciting stuff.
Super cool. I cried watching the finishing video. There's an interview of her like right when she reached the gate. And it made me emotional. You
can feel her pain, like watching her run that last stretch.
She's hoarse.
Yeah.
She finished with like 99 seconds left.
Yeah. No.
Which is just bananas.
And an incredible story. Just to put in perspective how difficult this is, I believe Anish has tried 4 or 5 times, and Anish is one of the most, if not the most accomplished thru-hiker on Earth. And if somebody else was able
Yeah.
to do something that she was not. It just goes to show how absolutely badass she is. So shout out to Jasmine for completing this incredible feat. If you guys haven't, I highly encourage you to check out the Barkley Marathon documentary. I believe it's on Prime. Last I checked years ago, it was on Prime and it was free, if memory serves. Have you seen?
I haven't actually seen it.
No?
I just have followed the Barkley through like social media for years, and I need to.
You would love it.
I absolutely need
Yeah,
to. I
you
feel
would
like,
love it.
Speaking of, we almost did a triple crown of movies that make you cry. I'll probably cry.
Yeah.
I don't even need to watch it to
For
know
sure.
that.
Yeah. I'm not even a big ultra runner guy. Like, I appreciate it just because of being adjacent to that world here in the thru-hiking land. But the marathon, the Barkley Marathon documentary is captivating, and I highly encourage anyone listening to this to watch it. Okay. Question of the day. Love this one. How excited are we to have Elise back on Backpacker Radio?
Woo!
Yeah, very excited from my vantage point.
I'm stoked. Stoked to be back. It's good to be back.
Good.
It feels so natural.
Yeah. You mentioned when you sat down how weird it was to be in Chauncey's chair.
Yes, that, I mean, I haven't ever done that before. Well, maybe I have.
I think you
I've
have.
co-hosted before, but
Yeah.
and I guess I did sit in this chair that time now that I'm thinking about it,
Yeah.
but I'm used to sitting over.
The hot seat.
Yeah, in the guest seat.
Now you're in the cold seat. But,
Yeah. But it's good to be here. Can't replace Chauncey, but
Yeah.
good
Did I blow past why Chauncey wasn't on the podcast today? I feel like I did. People are going to assume the
I
worst.
feel like you might have mentioned that she was out of town.
Is that what? I actually don't even know the answer. Right?
Oh, no, we just
She
did
started
that
her
off
job.
air. Yeah, she started a new job, and so she wasn't sure.
Yeah, her availability.
Yeah, so.
I think that's why. I'm not totally sure, but
I know the BPR calendar says she's out of office, but she has been responding to my text messages, and then I felt bad. I was like, should I not be bothering her? And this is all me externally processing right now. I haven't spoken to her about it.
yeah. No, Chauncey is much worse at cutting the cord from work-related stuff than I am. When I'm out of office, I can't be reached.
Yeah.
I need to decompress a little bit, but Chauncey is always on. So, Chauncey, how you doing? Okay. Let's do Triple Crown. So this one is I reckon the original one that we had planned was inspired by you as well. We were going to do the Triple Crown of Southern sayings, and maybe one day we'll bring this one back. I believe that was Rachel doing a tip of the cap to you going to school in Alabama. And
Yeah, maybe.
is growing up in Missouri, is that the South?
I don't know. So that's an interesting thing because the original Triple Crown was like phrases that get under your skin. And to be honest, I really do like a lot of the Southern phrases, so it's hard for me. But one thing is people used to call me a Yankee being from Missouri. And it just really depends who you talk to, whether they think Missouri is Southern or Northern or Midwestern. I feel like Missouri people, it's also, I have a different perspective being from St. Louis. Like in St. Louis, I think we would all very much call ourselves Midwesterners more than anything. But you get into Southern Missouri, like in the Ozarks, people there might call themselves Southerners.
Yeah.
And then like Springfield is technically further north than Missouri or than St. Louis, I think. But I feel like they might even feel a little bit Southern. Springfield feels a little more, it's like the head of, like Cabela's originated there, I think. Or was it Bass Pro? I don't know. But it feels more like a Southern town.
Yeah. What was the history of St. Louis during the Civil War? That'll answer
We
some
were
questions.
with the Missouri was in the Confederacy.
Okay, yeah. So you're definitely not a Yankee.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
it doesn't feel, it feels distinctively different from like the Southeast.
Yeah.
For sure. But
I mean, I'm from outside of Chicago, clearly not Confederate town. And yeah, you get into rural parts of the state and it changes very quickly.
yeah, in rural parts of Missouri definitely have that, can have that vibe.
Yeah. But we're pivoting to another, what I imagine would be a passion of Elise's, given her Instagram stories. This is the Triple Crown of breakfasts, and this is inspired by the fact that I've never seen anyone post more videos of people breaking into yolks than you.
I've been slacking lately, to be honest. But yeah, I have an entire Instagram highlight dedicated to breaking yolks. And I love, cause people send me videos sometimes now, and I love it. Every time I get one, just know that makes me happy.
Do you have a specific name for this? Is that like...
It's just called yolks on
Yolks?
Instagram.
Okay.
The highlight is just called yolks.
Not
but
like egg porn or anything like that?
no, I mean, yeah, I don't really even remember like why I started it. It was a habit, I guess, that I had of like breaking them, and then I was like, might as well dedicate a space to this.
So before we get into the meat and potatoes of the Triple Crown of breakfasts, what is the best way to cook an egg by Elisa's standards? Is it poached?
That's a great question. I as far as like consuming an egg, I love a fried egg, like sunny side up, but I do think poached yield the best like yolk popping results.
Sure. Yeah, because you're less likely, because when you fry an egg, you're going to at least get it somewhat hard on the bottom side.
Yeah, and I think there's also like the surprise element of a poached egg.
Sure.
You don't see the yolk before you pop it when you're popping a poached yolk. So I think visually that one's a little more intriguing to me, but
I never think to poach it. I eat a lot of eggs. I never think to poach it.
It's kind of more of a chore for sure.
Yeah, because I know you're supposed to use a little bit of vinegar, right?
Yeah,
and people
and
have different methods for getting it in there safely.
Yeah, and you put it in like a pot of water, and some people use salt. And growing up, my dad had like a contraption that he would put in the microwave that would poach eggs. But I've been meaning to ask him about that lately.
Yeah.
Because
that seems like the ultimate cheat code to just use the microwave for this.
I feel like I don't know if they were as good.
Yeah.
I feel like the yolks were hard from what I remember.
I have trouble believing that a microwaved egg will yield the same result as actually putting it in boiling water, but what do I know?
I know that I used to make my dad eat the yolks, so it's been quite the evolution for me.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
I think that's a common thing. I used to love the egg white, and now I'm all about that creamy yolk. Okay, Triple Crown of breakfast. I don't think this needs any introduction or explanation. Do you want to start?
Sure.
Yeah.
I think after that entire conversation, I have to start with the eggs Benny.
Of course.
Yeah. I love especially one with like a good like meat on the bottom. Typically, I'll go for like bacon and cheese and spinach or something like that as the base of my eggs Benny. And I have to go light on the hollandaise. I know that's like a crucial part for a lot of people, but as an IBS girly, I struggle with too much hollandaise. But
is it the mayonnaise that is disturbing to you?
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm not sure.
And for Eggs Benedict, is there a traditional, because that's not my forte, but when I think of Eggs Benedict, I'm thinking English muffin, Canadian bacon, poached egg, hollandaise sauce, and a little paprika.
Yes.
Is that like the traditional?
That's as far as I know, yeah.
Okay. I had a feeling you were going to take that. Didn't have it on my list for that reason. I'm going to go with something that I had today, which is a breakfast burrito. I love me a good breakfast burrito, and we could probably break this down into several different categories, so I'll even go more granular. I like the to-go, like food truck style breakfast burrito, the ones that are smothered in a ton of chili. I can still appreciate, but definitely not my go-to breakfast burrito style. And I can even get more granular. Needs to be hash browns, the home style fries in a breakfast burrito. Gross, too starchy. It's not.
It overpowers the whole thing.
Totally.
It dries it out.
Yeah. And then people that throw like corn and beans and no. I need hash browns. I need eggs. I need bacon and or chorizo, like a good green chili or something to add a little bit of sauce to it, and cheese. And that's it.
I would agree. Hard agree. Bonfire burritos, shout out to them.
And I went to
like delicious.
Bonfire is the best. Yeah. I love when people come to town so I can take them there because I do appreciate that place very much. There's a new food truck, and I think there's a few of them around Denver, but there's one kind of on my way into the office here called Pablitos Burritos. And I think they specialize in just breakfast, and it was pretty close to Bonfire.
Dang.
Yeah.
Good to know.
And like both in girth, size, weights, and just overall quality. A little bit heavier on the hash brown compared to Bonfire, but I don't hate that.
Sometimes Bonfire even underdoes that.
Yeah.
Like in the chorizo one specifically, I feel like sometimes I get just all chorizo.
Yeah. No, you gotta have the right level of
delicious,
crisp.
But
yeah.
They started distributing those to the grocery stores up by us, so that's why I'm like.
I've come down on my high from the Bonfire grocery store burritos. They're still the best. Yeah. Still the best grocery store burrito you're gonna get, but not up to the restaurant standards.
Not fresh.
Yeah. And I got the turn here, so I'm gonna go with I love a good croissant egg sandwich.
Ooh.
So like an egg sandwich specifically on croissant bread.
Yeah.
Nothing too much to say about it. Just something like that. That's where the bread is done correctly. Nice crispy bacon. Typically 1 to 2 eggs.
Delicious.
Yeah, fried eggs specifically.
Can you do a runny yolk fried egg in a sandwich? I have mixed feelings about it sometimes.
You would have to be sure that you've got a side of potato, because you're going to lose too much
Sop
yolk.
it up.
Yeah, you need something to clean up the mess. If you just got like fruit on the side or nothing, then absolutely not.
Yeah. Fair.
Yeah.
And no plate if it's like a to-go sandwich.
Oh, yeah. No,
that's like deal breaker.
Yeah, it'd be like eating with the twins.
Yeah.
You're just covered in it. All right, you're up.
My next one's kind of bougie, but it's like my go-to if it's available, and that's a bagel with lox.
Ooh, that's on my list.
Oh.
I love a good lox bagel.
It's so good.
Yeah. So we need to get even more in the weeds here. What bagel are you going?
Everything.
Yep, that's correct. And
the
what are your
capers
other
and the
fixings?
onion.
Okay.
I feel like, capers, onion. If the cream cheese, if they have like options for cream cheese, I love like a vegetable cream cheese with the lox.
Like a good chive cream cheese is good too. Yeah. No, that's you took one off my list. I'm not happy about it.
My apologies.
Yeah.
Do I go twice now
Yeah.
though? And I will say, bagel with lox, even in Colorado, like they're still delicious.
Yeah.
I'm not afraid of landlocked lox.
Yeah, agreed.
The last one, I'm kind of like torn. There's a couple that I feel like could make it, but I think I'm gonna have to go with a good skillet, which has been really hard for me to find in Colorado.
Sure.
I've taken to like making them at home occasionally, which I love. But there was this place in Atlanta that I used to go to, like super hungover, and they would bring it out like in a cast iron skillet, like, and it was just like so greasy, and like potatoes, some vegetables in there, bits of bacon, cheese melted on top with like an egg or two fried, and it was just, that was like a cure-all for hangovers and just delicious.
Not many breakfasts that I have had in the South are always very good, and I'm excited to get to the honorable mentions because I'm sure you can.
I have some.
You've got some stories,
sure.
yeah. My last one, I'm torn between my fat guy option and my healthy guy option. If we're gonna do honorable mentions, eventually, we'll just do them both.
We should.
Yeah, but I'm gonna go with a good acai bowl. Shout out to Southern California for putting this on my radar 12 years ago now. But yeah, I don't know. Maybe it's got the perception of being a healthy way to start the day. You're probably still ingesting 100 grams of sugar, but to give the guise of getting health in the form of fruit with granola and honey, and there's a million different ways to present it. But yeah, nothing like a good acai bowl. Big fan.
Yeah, I've never had an acai bowl, to be honest.
I think it started out exclusively as a Southern California thing, and it's gotten so popular that like legitimately you can buy them in Golden, Colorado now. They are a little on the pricier side typically. I think acai is expensive itself, but yeah, if you ever get the opportunity, it's basically a smoothie in a bowl, a very thick smoothie in a bowl with a fruit, some granola, and some honey. Typically is what you're looking at.
Yum.
Yeah.
Well, I guess we're moving on to honorable mentions.
Yeah, I'm really excited to hear the Southern
first. Yeah, the first one for me is gonna be grits, cheesy grits specifically.
Yeah.
I didn't grow up eating grits, so another point for St. Louis not being Southern.
Yeah.
But I started eating them in college. Not all grits are the same, and I think when people are like, "Ew, grits are gross," they just like haven't had. My personal philosophy is that they haven't had the right grits, because they're delicious if you get them done the right way.
That was my first experience with it, and someone explained it to me that it wasn't going to be sweet, but it just looked so much like oatmeal that I had a preconceived notion for what it should taste like.
And some people put sugar in them. Like some people like to put like sweet stuff in their grits.
Yeah. I know it's a blank canvas. You can do whatever you want with.
Yeah, basically. So I guess, but I like them when they're a lot thicker and like more of like almost a potato texture. Yeah. That's not quite right, but that's the closest I can explain. I don't like super watery grits. When they just like kind of spill over the plate, like that's gross to me. But if they like hold their shape basically, like in your spoon, that's the kind of grits I like. And cheesy ones.
Is it a grain? What exactly is a grit?
I don't.
Grits are a type of porridge made from coarsely ground dried maize or hominy, the latter being maize that has been treated with an alkali in a process.
Corn.
Okay.
Of some sort. Yeah.
Interesting. So you said cheesy grits. Do you know what type of cheese they're using in cheesy grits?
Just like cheddar cheese in the ones that I've had.
Yeah.
Yeah. just like shredded cheddar cheese, and it'll like kind of melt on top or like within.
Yeah.
Some places, if you go like fancy and you get like the plate that's like andouille sausage and grits, they'll have like cheese that's definitely like mixed in. Like I've heard, like I've had like Gouda grits and like, you know, like fancy cheeses in there. There's like all sorts of things you can do. It's like kind of honestly, like if you think about it, like potatoes, they like can do all sorts of stuff. But the simple ones I've had, just like literally just cheddar cheese.
Yeah. I know shrimp and grits is a big
Shrimp and grits is
thing.
delicious too. Yeah.
Is that?
I would say it's not a breakfast food.
Yeah.
But yeah.
How do they dress up the grits for that dish? Or do they? Is it just the
No,
shrimp?
I feel like they do for sure. It's like kind of like some Cajun seasoning. I feel like sometimes there's definitely cheese in there.
I'm making you the expert of Cajun.
Yeah, I don't really. I don't know. I don't know that much,
Yeah.
so don't don't fact check me.
No,
but that feels like, I feel like, and there's like distinct like color differences. Like if you get like the kind of grits that are like the watery kind that I'm talking about that I don't love, like those are always like white.
Yeah.
And then like the ones that have the cheese like kind of mixed in, I've seen like a pale like almost salmony orange, and then you know they like I just looked up shrimp and grits to like see if I could see what they mix in there. There's like some more yellow looking grits, sharp cheddar, bacon, and lime juice in this recipe that I'm reading right now. Sounds delicious.
Yeah. I need to introduce grits into my life. I think I've had it less than 5 times. I mean, I've definitely had it less than 5 times.
They're hard. I do feel like it's one of those things where if it's not done right, it's not delicious.
Sure.
But when it's done right, it's freaking delicious.
Not like pizza. The worst pizza,
as
they say, is
still,
like the
you
worst
can eat
sex.
it.
Yeah. Okay. And my last one. This is what made me fat when I was a kid, in addition to everything, is cereal. It's just like, not only cereal is rarely a healthy option. I still stand by granola, but I can't have one bowl of cereal.
Yeah, it's like an endless
Yeah.
pit. Because I feel like I feel like I've heard Chance say this, so apologies if I'm just repeating something she said before, but like you put in, you know, what you think is the right ratio of like cereal to milk, and then you end up with like extra milk or extra cereal.
Sure.
So you like try and balance it out, and then it's just like
constantly adding layers to it,
and you're still hungry. Like it doesn't fill you up, I feel like.
Yeah.
So.
No, it's for me, the thing that is the most easy to overeat is cereal.
I could, hard agree.
Yeah.
Have you ever packed out cereal for like a trail breakfast?
No.
It's so good. Dehydrated milk in cereal. It's delicious.
Yeah, it's an interesting idea, and I typically try to pack out like a protein powder as well. That'd be a good way to work protein powder in your diet.
I couldn't find any dehydrated milk one time, and I was asking people, does breakfast essentials, is it going to be too sweet? And it was actually pretty delicious. But so yeah, you could just do like a vanilla breakfast essentials and cereal, but I think it would have been even better if it was milk and breakfast essentials and cereal.
Yeah. Hell yeah.
Yeah. It's super lightweight too, so like if you're looking for a lightweight breakfast,
love that.
It's just not portable. That's like a lot of my trail breakfasts I try and do portable, but if I'm doing like a bougie backpacking trip where I'm chilling, I'll pack out some cereal.
Fuck yeah. Do you have any other breakfast? That's my list, especially since you took wax.
I just want a quick honorable mention for another southern biscuits and gravy.
Sure. Yes.
Yeah. Gotta be careful with that one, but it's delicious.
Yeah, careful because you get fat very quickly.
Careful because I'm an IBS girl.
Oh yeah. You've got to be careful with it. Yeah. Have you been to the Denver Biscuit Company?
No.
There's a bunch around town.
I've heard really good things. I have heard excellent things, but I have not been.
It's one of those things where you're signing up to ruin the rest of your day for sure. Like you have it and you can't function for 4 hours minimum, but there's certain days where it's worth it. Cool. Tripicon breakfast. Would love to hear your guys. What segment do we have next? We've got a voicemail. Let's make sure I'm not going to break anyone's eardrums here.
I'm going to preemptively.
Hello. I love your guys' show, and I love the episode with Kevin the Animal about the Four Corners Leaf Trail. I had a question about the bushwhacking and like how you reconcile that with Leave No Trace. I know it's public land, but like I think of bushwhacking and I think of like Crocodile Dundee with a machete, like tearing everything up. So just wondering your thoughts on that. And then second question is specifically for Zach. With all those vitamins and supplements.
So Rachel being Rachel, she listened to the voicemail, realized that her question got cut off. I'm not sure if that's a limit on our plan or what happened, but she followed up with Christina here to get to the rest of the question. I'll read it. You spoke about taking numerous supplements, so that made me curious how long-distance backpackers deal with taking multiple pills per day, specifically for backpackers on a long-distance hike who need or want to take multiple pills per day, whether from supplements or necessary medications. What's the best way to package them? When I go for a weekend, I put what I need in a day in a tiny baggie. It occurred to me that if I can go for a couple months, that would be a lot of tiny baggies. Let's start with the bushwhacking question first, and then we'll come back to this. Do you want to take that one? I feel like you're fresh off the CDT and Hayduke. Wait, Hayduke's this year.
I've thought about doing the Hayduke.
Okay.
I don't currently have. I would love to,
Yeah.
but the Fifner Traverse is the one that comes to
Fifner,
mind
yeah.
for like the most like actual bushwhacking that I've done. I don't have like an official like, LNT perspective on it. My assumption has been, and I love the question because I've honestly wondered the same thing before, is basically like if you're, well, first of all, I think it depends on as far as like the crocodile Dundee bushwhacking, like I'm never taking out like a machete and like whacking things down when I'm personally bushwhacking. And I do think that would definitely violate leave no trace in any context. Like if someone's like hacking down bushes as they're going, when I'm thinking of bushwhacking, I'm thinking more like I'm whacking things with my arms and trekking poles, like keep them out of my face, but like truly not really. I'm just kind of like my body's just like moving through it. So that's one thing is like I would imagine that cutting things down is typically frowned upon.
Yeah.
However, I know like it happens in certain contexts.
Yeah. Because even when Leave No Trace talks about building fires, they're like very explicit. Always pick up down wood.
Yeah. But like then you hear about stuff in survival context, and they say like it's better to take wood off of like standing dead trees than it is off the ground because it's drier.
Yeah.
But regardless of like that conflicting, whatever. I think typically if you're bushwhacking, you're going to be taking a route it's very unlikely that you're going to be intersecting or that there's going to be a lot of people traveling through that route versus like on a trail or at a campsite. The use is just so much higher and more concentrated in those areas. And that's why it's important to like be really diligent about not disturbing the plant life nearby versus like during a bushwhack, like the likelihood of two people taking the exact same route is like a lot lower. So it's more about like the impact and like the environment can bounce back a lot more quickly would be my guess versus, if a billion people a day are passing this tree and like cutting a branch off of it, like pretty soon that tree's not going to be there. And even if you think it's like a remote area, like a lot more people pass through on trails than we, I think, imagine.
Mm-hmm.
So that would be my take on it, is that it's probably just less concentrated.
Yeah. I also would love to get Leave No Trace perspective on this.
Yeah.
And thanks to the Badger sponsorship, I now have much better inroads with them. But yeah, just basically doubling down on what you said. I think in the areas where people are typically bushwhacking, there's so little foot traffic that making a trail would actually be more of leaving a trace than actually just the bushwhacking itself. But it is also a good question because, if you're off trail, it is
you're
much
making
harder.
an impact for sure. Yeah, more of an impact. And I will say, like, I tried, like if you're at a place like the desert, for example, like you have to be careful about traveling. And in general, they say when you are traveling off trail, you should travel on durable surfaces as much as possible. So like if you can walk on a rock, do that instead of like, especially in the desert, for example, like trampling. You don't want to trample any like cryptobiotic soil or anything. So like traveling in a wash where it's like the sand's literally going to be washed away is preferable to like stemping on any sort of vegetation. So as much as you can mimic that in like alpine environments is good too.
Yeah. I'm not an expert, so I won't say any more on it, but I think what you said was my instinct as well. And yeah, maybe we'll do a follow-up with Leave No Trace on that because that's interesting.
That'd be a good idea. Yeah, don't take anything I say for word.
Yeah. For the question about supplements, so I take a ungodly amount of supplements, too many supplements. I've always been a sucker for this. I'll read one study that says X supplement does Y, and I'm like, okay, I'm gonna buy a month's supply of it. That said, for backpacking, I definitely try to pare it down to what I consider to be the bare essentials, and that is always evolving too. I think I wrote a piece about what I brought for the PCT, and I'm trying to remember off the top of my head. Protein powder, curcumin, because I tried not to take Advil of any kind, and that's a pretty potent anti-inflammatory. And I think I just took a multivitamin. I think that literally was it. If I'm forgetting anything, I can cross-reference it with the article. But I think nowadays it would be something similar to that, just depending on what it is. A shorter trip, I'll probably bring more of the kitchen sink. For something that's like a significant through hike, I would probably pare it down to as little as possible. But for me, it's always just a good multivitamin, which is why I was stoked when we had Organifi on as a sponsor. I think that kind of acts as a multivitamin. Now I just actually take a multivitamin. I use Thorne. They have a advanced nutrients multivitamin, which is literally 8 pills. Is one serving is 8 pills.
Wow. How do you package that?
So yeah, that is her question. I don't package it into day servings. I package each supplement into its own bag, and then I try to just take it from one resupply to the next. The areas where I'm not sending myself a resupply, like this is going to be very trail dependent, obviously, but on the PCT through like Oregon and Washington, we were sending a lot of resupplies just because it's expensive to buy from the various resorts and small convenience shops out there. So that was very easy to send myself supplements. In California, where you are going to more grocery stores, I would just take more supplements, and it's added weight, but that's one of those things where, if I'm not going to be nutty about putting supplements in my body, then I don't have to take it, but I choose to do that. So yeah, it's just each supplement goes into its own Ziploc bag, and then I know how many pills I take per day. Magnesium is another huge one. I don't know if I was taking it on the PCT, but not only is that something that a ton of people are deficient in, but also if you have issues sleeping, a magnesium deficiency is going to be really bad for that. I'm a big proponent of magnesium threonate, which is the form of magnesium that most easily, or maybe the only form of magnesium that crosses the brain-blood barrier. So it'll just relax you, especially because I deal with migraines. It's supposed to be preventative for that. Yeah.
Didn't mean to talk about poop so much, but magnesium also keeps you very regular.
Yeah, and sometimes it can keep you a little too regular.
Yes, use with caution. But.
Yeah, so I think there are certain forms that will make you run pretty quickly, and certain forms that are a little bit easier on your gut. Offhand, I don't know which ones are best for that. But yeah, if you deal with constipation, magnesium is a really good one.
Yeah, and I would also reiterate what you said about like, I'll send the amount I need to probably get me to where I would reasonably get more supplements. Like I think turmeric was the only thing I really carried on the CET, and I ended up buying a bunch, and I didn't want to waste them, so I just carried like a big bag of them with me. If you're worried about things getting smashed, you can always do like small like plastic containers. Like the first thing that comes to mind is like those little disc containers. I don't know what they're actually like made for, but you could put pills in that if you're worried about them smashing. And then like they should be in the bottom of your pack, so as far as like being blocked from the sun, I feel like that part is covered. And the only other like concern I've had in the past was like I have had fish oil pills that have like melted together. So
fish oil is one you have to be very careful with.
I would just say like if you're going to be in extreme temperatures, probably avoid supplements that would not fare well.
I take fish oil every day, or at least the days that I can remember to do it. And that's one I specifically don't bring backpacking, even though I know the benefits of it would be directly in line with backpacking for that exact reason. Is I don't think fish oil needs to be exposed to that extreme of temperatures for it to go rancid. And at that point, it's defeating the purpose of what it should be doing. So, yeah. I'm curious to know more about your supplement regimen while backpacking. You mentioned curcumin.
That's it pretty much. I don't really like... I think I do need to incorporate like a multivitamin of some sort because.
But you're also pretty diligent with your diet.
I try to be.
Yeah.
I don't know that I'm truly that good at it, but I think, and I want to incorporate more. Yeah, like I think magnesium would be a good one for me, and yeah. I don't have a solid foundation though.
Yeah.
To be honest.
Yeah, in any circumstance where you're sweating a lot, magnesium is good. All the electrolytes are good. Shout out to Element. Definitely love that when I'm pounding out the sweat. We have a Plug Me. This is where we plug prior guests of the show. Shout out to Christine Reed. This is Blood, Sweat, and Tears is a new book that she's releasing. Is a collection of short stories by 26 women plus hikers. Women plus, I'm assuming. 26 women, hikers and runners.
26 plus women, maybe.
Okay. About their experiences in a female body on trail. It's got periods, underboob sweat, and ugly crying, which I let Christine know is right up our alley here on Backpacker Radio, on mountains all over the U.S., Canada, and South America. It was born of our collective desire to come to appreciate and love our bodies better and share the stories of how time on trail has helped us toward that goal. It's available at ruggedouhtdoorswoman.com with some sweet outdoorsy uterus-themed merch. So yeah, congrats to Christine. Did she say the publication date, or is it already out?
It looks like it's already out. I just clicked on it, and it looks like add to my cart.
Sweet. Cool.
Oh, pre-order. Sorry. It does say pre-order, which is great for authors, by the way.
Yeah.
So.
Let's see. This is coming out April 29th. It looks like the book releases on May 1st. So likely by the time you hear this, it's out. But in the case that you're hearing this on release day, go ahead and pre-order it. Mailbag. I'm so used to Tron's taking this. I'm going to pass the torch to you.
Okay, I got it. Love you guys so much. I've listened to every episode, and I want some stickers. LOL. I like the new avenue Chance put out. Here I am, guys. Happy trails. Also, is Chance currently on the Foothills Trail? Keep up with the good work, guys. I think that's funny because that's from Chelsea, by the way. This is me talking now. I think that's funny because I know Chance just mentioned, like, she purposely kind of confuses timelines. She, I guess, as we discussed, is not currently on the Foothills Trail.
No.
She's back now.
Yeah, I think as a matter of necessity, I don't think she posted her first Foothills thing until she was done with the trail. So, yeah, likely by the time that you're learning of her hike, she's already done. But she does like when you guys have like little tidbits to share because she just likes you guys. So.
Chris also wrote in and just simply said from Peter King's NBC column, quote, Sisyphus looks upon Buffalo football and wonders what it's like to suffer like that. That would have been better for Chauncey,
yeah,
for sure.
I know. We'll have to bring that back on a future mailbag. But that one got a good chuckle out of me. Thank you to Chris for highlighting that. Yeah, never mind. I'm not going to say what I was going to say. But if you guys want to reach the show, podcast at thetrek.co or go to backpackerradio.com and you can email us through the contact form on that page. 5-star review. This is from Rich Lardy, my favorite hiking podcast. Hey guys, greetings from the Dominican Republic. I recently completed a 5-day hike up Pico Duarte Peak, which happens to be the highest mountain in the Caribbean. I binged dozens of past episodes I've never heard before on that trip. I actually summited with you guys and Kevin Nealon. That's funny. Thanks for accompanying me on that truly amazing hike. 5 stars is just not enough. I wish I could give you 6. Trail name Chic. Thank you, Chic. That's very nice of you to say, and I'm glad. I feel like Kevin Nealon is an appropriate one to end with a high note on.
It's a good one.
Yep. And if you guys want to hear your reviews read on this podcast, head on over to Apple Podcasts and leave us any number of stars, just not 1, 2, 3, or 4. And if you screenshot your review and send us an email with your review, we will give you a sticker. I think we're still doing that. So, yeah, thanks for supporting us. Before we get to Chuck Norris, I want to do a quick catch-up. What do you got on the docket for this year, adventure-wise?
Ooh. This is definitely still like in between through hikes, save money, work kind of year. But I say that and maybe that's not entirely true. I am heading to Utah soon, actually. I'll be back-ish. I'll be there when this airs. But I'm going to take a backcountry navigation course in
sweet.
Canyonlands.
Nice.
In the
Through
Needles District.
A particular school? Or
Okay, so shout out this. Yes, love talking about this. All the Colorado people, if you are interested in any sort of like outdoor wilderness class, and I would encourage anyone in other states to look into like local colleges, Colorado Mountain College has like incredible classes and offerings for a fraction of the price that you get them anywhere else. So I took my Abbey course through them, and I'm not in any way like affiliated, just I feel like this is a great hack for anyone who wants to take important courses and not break the bank. I took my Avalanche 1 course, which a lot of people know is fairly expensive. Like I would say like most courses are minimum $600. And obviously a very important course to take if you're going to be doing any sort of like backcountry skiing or backcountry recreating in the winter. And I paid $150 for it through CMC. I get like in county tuition because I live in the mountains, and so my credit hours are like $100 a credit hour. In state, I think it's $200 a credit hour, so still an incredible deal. Like you would pay $300 for an Abbey course, which is half of the typical, and they can definitely get up closer to $1,000.
Yeah. How much is the NAV course?
The NAV course is also $150, I think.
Damn.
It was because it's 3 credit or 1.5 credit hours.
Yeah.
Both of them are, and then
So it'd be $300 for other Coloradans.
Okay. So 1.5. Both of those are 1.5. The only thing that's not too much cheaper from them, they have I looked into their wilderness first responder courses, and I think that's partially because of the cert that you have to buy. Like that certification ends up making it cost, because a wilderness first responder course to them is like 4 credit hours plus the amount you pay for the certification. So it ends up being similar to like the Knowles cost, but there's a bunch of other classes through them. Like there's a swiftwater rescue course you can do for like $150 if you're in county, 1.5 credit hours. So whatever that ends up being for you. But yeah, so I'm doing the backcountry nav course through CMC. Colorado Mountain College, to clarify, there's like a bunch of CMCs actually in the States. So, and then
I know Twinkle's spoken highly of them in the
yeah,
past
they're
as well.
great.
Yeah.
I've only taken 1 course so far, but my experience, there's like some small learning curves with like in the logistical details. Like you have to enroll as a like non-degree seeking student, and then you use like their learning platform called Canvas, I think. And that thing can be, if you haven't done something like that in several years like me, like I haven't done that since I left college, that can be like a little tricky to navigate. You just kind of have to be on top of it, but it's not anything that would deter me from taking more courses through them.
Yeah.
But then I'm taking a woofer actually as well. Literally I have like 3 or 4 days in between, and I'm going to go backpacking with Kate Stickers.
Oh, sweet.
She's going to meet me up there. We're going to go backpacking in Canyonlands. We kind of just like snagged whatever permits we could get. We're going to see like what route ends up panning out. But, and then I'm going to take a woofer through Knowles in Moab.
Sweet.
So yeah.
That's a nice little spring you've got cooked up for yourself. Yeah.
Yeah. It'll be like 2 weeks in Utah, which will be nice. And then in June, Josh and I are going to Black Canyon and the Gunnison again.
Yeah. You've forgotten about National Park in Colorado.
Yeah. It's, I feel like I'm spot burning. We're going for the salmon fly hatch. It was so cool. It's like a tough hike down to the bottom of the canyon, in that like it's not long, but just like be prepared for like, just it's so steep and like kind of like class 2 in a lot of areas. Like you're just like using your hands to like lower yourself down stuff. But it's awesome.
Doable for somebody that doesn't like exposure.
For sure, because it's not like, or at least I felt like I didn't feel exposed. It was just like so steep, because like everything around you, like you're in in this like drainage going into the canyon, or at least the route we took. So it's not like I was peering over edges. It's like, the walls are all around you. I guess you could like fall down or backwards because of how steep it is, but I didn't feel exposed.
Yeah.
It was just like super steep.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Imagine getting back up. That's probably pretty fun
It
too.
It made me feel very validated and in shape. I did it like right after the Fifner last year.
Yeah.
And so I felt pretty good, honestly. But yeah, I mean, it's a doozy for sure. I think going down was worse.
Yeah.
Like, because of how much I was tensing my legs, worried about falling forward.
Yeah.
It was definitely worse going down.
Have we chatted since the Fifner? I don't think we have. I mean, I know
Maybe
I've seen you at the
not.
hiker meetup, but we
Yeah.
haven't specifically talked about the Fifner.
Maybe not.
How'd that go?
It was awesome. I had a lot of nerves going into it.
Yeah.
Was very I had never done anything, besides just the inadvertent moments of getting off trail on the CDT, but never like intentionally gone on a route. But there were small sections of CDT. We did like some route finding stuff, but just in general, I was pretty nervous about the undertaking, and it went really, really well. And it was a lot of fun, and definitely like a doozy. There's a lot of elevation gain, and it's tiring for sure. But
What's the gully section?
Oh, the Northeast Gully. So we missed some stuff. There was a fire for part of it that we missed, like some of the traversing by near not James Peak. What's that pass that's like, anyway, that's not the same section.
Yeah.
But and then we missed the first day we started from Rocky Mountain. There was a gnarly storm like immediately, and
we had the exact same experience. We started in hail.
Yeah, we took the same route that you guys did.
Okay.
I think further down, the like lower below
Yeah.
tree line one. Or actually no, we ended up taking the CDT because our campsite happened to be on the CDT, and I had missed that section of the CDT because there was closures in Rocky Mountain in 22. So that kind of was like some poetic.
Yeah, got to fill in some gaps.
Yeah, so it wasn't like a route at that. But anyway, the part that you're asking about is the Northeast Gully, and like that's considered like the crux of the route.
Mm-hmm.
Northeast Gully and oh shoot, I'm like blanking. It's something with a P. There's a pass that starts with a P. It was looking kind of moody that afternoon, and we were both kind of like pretty happy with what we'd done to that point, and my hiking partner Leslie and I were kind of like, do we feel equipped to do this? And I think looking back now, we're both kind of like, we wish we, or maybe not we wish we'd done it because the skies looked questionable, but we feel like we can go back and do it. We're going to try and go back this summer, hopefully, and fill in those two. I'm blanking on the second one. Something with a P. But yeah, we did not end up doing the Northeast Gully when we went. But
good.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just, you'd rather have a little bit of, I don't know if regret's the word that you'd use, but like slowly build your way, as opposed to like going down the most technical part of a difficult trail in downpours, unsafe and
realizing
dangerous.
We shouldn't be there. So Piegon Pass? No, that's in Glacier. Okay, that's gonna bother me, but never mind. I can move on. But yeah, I think we made the right decision for us at the time, and we're excited to go fill it in. So it'll be good.
Sweet. How'd you like the James Peak Traverse section?
That was sweet.
Yeah.
That's what I think when we were like, oh, we could have done Northeast Gully. Not that it's the same thing, but like that section between Bancroft and Perry, I think.
Yeah.
Where it's kind of scrambly. We were like,
that's the high exposure part.
Yeah.
Like when you get to, it's down
past James
Peak.
Yeah. Or it's between James and Bancroft, I guess.
That part got my palms very sweaty.
Yeah.
And it's always way worse from a distance. Like once you get there.
Yeah, it looks bad, and then you do it, and then we were like, oh, this is fun. And then we were like, well, that's probably what Northeast Gully would have been like too. Like looking at it, it looks intimidating. We know kind of that it is the most like crux part of the route, but yeah, we liked it. But we did end up, I felt like the palm sweat inducing moment for us was like there was this huge inversion like rolling over the divide. So like as we had gotten through that part that like would have been the most slow going, but then we were trying to like climb these 13ers as these huge clouds are just rolling in, like to the point where I'm like, I'm pretty sure we're going to lose visibility of each other. So I was like, okay, I'm going to wait up for Leslie so we can at least be in like earshot. And we kept like expecting to just be enveloped in like a complete whiteout. And then the divide just like stopped it. And it was so cool looking. Like it was one of those like once in a lifetime. You're like, dang, I never would have. Yeah. Couldn't have planned this better. Like it was awesome, as much as it was a little bit nerve wracking.
Is that a typical weather pattern for the divide? I feel like it always makes things angrier.
I have no idea, but it like I have these photos of like the crowds. They're just like kind of like peeking over it. Yeah. Like feeling it very much felt like they just got stopped, but like we kind of were spilling over a bit.
That's fascinating.
Yeah, it was really cool.
Yeah. Sweet. Well.
Yeah. I like started rambling about my summer plans, but Leslie and I are hoping to do the Wind River High Route together this summer as well.
Hell yeah. Skirka or Adventure Island?
We haven't fully decided. I think we're leaning Skirka, but like resupply constraints I think might have an impact. We'll see. Yeah. And then I'm also hoping to hike the AZT in the fall. We'll see. And then
so just a light year.
And then and I'm like, this is the scariest one to say out loud, but my original plan was to do that in the spring and then attempt an FKT of the Ozark Trail in Missouri, where I'm from, as we've spoken about. And the only reason I bring that up is because, and the only reason I even think the record right now is like 9 days and 45 or not 45 hours, like 9 days and 6 hours or something. And so just feels like I don't think I'm will move into like doing a bunch of endurance or like FKT stuff, it's just like that one feels, that's like a 27-mile a day average, I think.
Oh yeah.
For that trail. So it just
I feel like you could do that today.
Oh, I don't think so. I don't think so.
Yeah.
I think it'll be really challenging, but I think it feels like, let's see what I can push. And I was actually like turned on to it by someone I met on the CDT who was also from St. Louis, ended up doing just like blasting the men's record after the CDT, and he got it down to like below 5 days, I believe. And so I was like, oh, I wonder what the women's record is.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, that seems, conceivable to attempt. And actually Katie Jackson, she's from Missouri as well, and we've talked about maybe like linking up for it.
Oh, cool.
So
yeah, well, she'll be fresh off the CDT.
Yeah, and I'm a little bit afraid she's gonna be way in better shape than I am, but
I'm sure you'll be perfectly fine.
We'll see.
Yeah.
But yeah, sorry to ramble.
No, I asked the question. Thank you. Cool. Well, sounds like you got a light year ahead for you.
Yeah, we'll see. I mean, life happens.
Yeah. And for those who aren't already, follow Elise on Instagram and YouTube. She's a prolific video maker.
I'm trying to backpack for a living one day,
Sure. Handles?
At Elise Ott, no special characters or spaces or anything on Instagram, and then just Elise Ott on YouTube. I believe the @ is also Elise Ott.
Fuck yeah. Super big thank you to our Chuck Norris Award winners on Patreon. That is Alex and Misty with Navigator. Oh, are you ready for chances for
I don't
here?
know. I don't think I know all of them.
Okay, I can do them. Alex and Misty with Navigators Crafting. Andrew, Austin McDaniel, Austin Ford, Brad and Blair from 13 Adventures, Brent Stenberg, Brian Alsop, Fables, Christopher Marshburn, Coach from Marine Outdoors, Dane Ish, Derek Koch, Eric Casper, the Friendly Ghost, Eric Hoffman, Greg Knight, Greg McDaniel, may he bring honor to his name, Haley Buckingham, new name, thank you, Jason Snaler, Barely Know Her, Liz Seeger, Patrick C. Cialo, Spam, Timothy Hahn, Solo, and Tracy Trigger. Franz. I still don't know the origin of the grunt. I should say I don't remember it.
I've heard this so many times, but it wasn't.
Yeah, I'm sure. I'm guessing I missed one or two in there, but Chance's job is hard. Follow us at Backpacker Radio on Instagram and TikTok for the time being, I guess, at Backpacker Pod on X, Facebook.com/Backpacker Radio. You can follow Elise, who just told us, at Elise Ott on Instagram and Elise Ott on YouTube, OTT.
Nailed it.
Appalachian Trials and Pacific Crest Trials are my books if you guys want to prepare for either of those trails. Subscribe and follow us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Follow us on YouTube. I think the video stopped. I don't know how long ago it stopped, but you're probably just hearing us at this point. But most episodes we've got video. And that's it for today's show. Thank you so much for listening, and happy hiking.